All right, guys, sit back. This one is going to be epic. We're going to look at transcription, which is something that was introduced not too long ago in iOS, and it basically allows us to speak into our microphone and get back a transcribed document or a transcribed bunch of words. Now, this is very expensive to do computationally, so Apple actually restrict us a little bit on what we can and can't do, especially in terms of length, but it's a very, very useful thing. And if you have an iPhone and you have a keyboard that pops up, there's a little microphone that you can actually press, and that will do the transcription for you, so you can preview what this is going to look like. But now that this is open to us developers, we're actually going to make a transcription app. So we're going to allow you to speak into the app, and it's going to transcribe your words for you. And don't mind the screenshots here. We haven't actually quite finished this, and we're going to finish it later on in this module, of course. That's why we have these things like optionals and whatnot. But the basics of the app are here. We're going to have a tabbed app. We're going to have navigation controllers in combination with tabs, which is an important thing to know about and something we haven't covered yet. And of course, we'll look at transcriptions, and along the way, we're going to discover a little bit about the iOS file systems, what goes where, why, when, and how, and all the rest of it, so you can understand where your files are written to. Right, so along the way, we're going to learn about tabbed apps. We're going to learn about permissions again. These aren't new to you, I hope. We're going to learn about recording from the microphone and the permissions for that, as well as saving those recordings somewhere. That will be new to you, as well as the transcriptions via Siri. That's also new. We're going to look at how we play back audio in a very basic manner, and that is really a gateway to making music apps. So once you've got the basic ideas of audio, you can then elevate that on and on in your app creation career if you want to make music apps. I actually started by making music apps for clients, so this is something I know quite a bit about. And then we're also going to look at something to do with core data. Now, most apps require data storage of some sort, and if your data storage is very simple, then we try to use simple things like the NS user defaults or just writing a text file, whatever it is. But as your data gets more complex, you need to use something more tailored to what you need. And that's what core data is all about. It's the very advanced data system built in to iOS that, if you're going to become a developer, is a must to at least learn the basics of. So we're going to learn the basics of it. We'll also look at simple things like saving text files on the file system, where our app is actually allowed to save them. So all that remains to say is let's go. All right, let's set up our app. And in this particular section, we're going to set up a tabbed app, and we've done this before. We're going to look at navigation, which we've done before. We're also going to look at permissions and core data. Now, most of that you know something about. Perhaps you don't know anything about core data yet, but there's really nothing new here. I mean, tabbed apps we've covered, navigation we've covered, and I'm just going to sort of lump these together. It's really simple to navigate within tabbed apps once you know how to actually do it. Permissions we've covered, so we're going to be using the microphone to record someone's speech. Obviously, Apple want us to ask their permission for that. We're also going to do a bit of checking to see if we already have permissions, so we can tell the user to grant us permissions from their settings if they've already declined that permission. And then we'll look at setting up core data, and all that is simply a checkbox when we create our app. It just means that it's included at the start by default so that we can use it later on. Don't skip this checkbox, or you're going to have a hell of a time trying to get core data to work. Right, so open up Xcode and let's start a fresh project. Righto, let's get started with a new Xcode project. And we, of course, want to have a tabbed app. Hit Next, and let's call this something like Transcriber. But, and it's a big but, there's something missing from this screen that's not obvious because it's missing. And that's our option to use core data. And for some reason, You don't get that when you set up a tabbed app, which means you have to then go through the painful process of including core data code later on. So what we're going to do instead is go back. We're going to go to a single view app, hit next, and you'll notice use core data is available here. So click that on. Let's go to our product name and have it as before. So I really don't know why Apple do this, but it is what it is, and there's probably a technical reason for it. It's easier to create a single view app with core data and then transfer that to a tabbed app, or make a tabbed app from that single view, rather than the other way around, which is to start with a tabbed app and try to include core data. You'll just be swimming upstream if you do it that second way. So let's have next on this, and let's just save it wherever you are going to save it. Okay, so we've basically included core data now. And perhaps we'll be able to see it if we go to build phases. And what do we have here? Nope, we won't be able to see what's included with it. That's fine. We can leave that as it is. But we do have core data enabled. And it's a bit annoying that it doesn't tell you anywhere that it's enabled, apart from over on the left-hand side, this file is what's going to hold our core data and allow us to browse it. Right, so that's enough about core data. What we're going to do now is set up our app. So go to your main storyboard, and we're going to create our tabbed app from this. So I'm just going to create a bit of space over here so we can see what's going on. Okay, so at the moment we have a view controller, which we don't actually want. What we need is a tab bar controller. So we can click and drag one of those in. And this normally comes with 2 tabs. So we can just drop it anywhere, such as there. I'll just shift this along a bit so we can see it properly. So you can move these wherever you like. There we go, so we can now see everything correctly. Right, so we can actually get rid of this initial view controller. Just select it, hit backspace, which as usual doesn't work as we expect it to. So let's just shift it across here. Now hit backspace, there we go. So now we have no entry point to the app, we have to fix that. So let's click our tab bar controller and select is initial view controller so that this arrow appears on it. Okay, so we have our view controllers, but again, we don't actually want these because we're going to have tables inside of our app. And these tables, these table views, are going to hold the previous transcriptions. So we can click them, we can edit them, we can export them, do all kinds of stuff with them. So we're just going to delete these view controllers that are dropped in by default. And then we are going to go look for our table view controllers. And we're going to have 2 of these. 1 and 2. Well done, Grant, you can count. And then we're going to control, click and drag over to the tab, to the table view controller. And we're going to give this a relationship. Now, what relationship do we want? Well, this is a view controller relationship. And you'll notice when you do that, the tabs at the bottom appear. So we'll do the same, control, click and drag to the second one, view controller relationship, and that's going to be the second tab. Okay, so let's select this first view controller, and you'll notice the tab bar item over at the top right. We can change the badge, we can change various items about it. So let's see what we can do here. Let's just put a test badge in. Okay, and that puts a little red badge on there. So that's not the thing that we want. We just want to change the name of this. So let's have this set as something like transcriptions. You can't make this too long, otherwise it doesn't actually fit in this little section here. That doesn't matter. For now, we can always beautify it later. Let's go to the second one, and let's call this favorites. So we're going to have a list of old transcriptions, and then we'll have a list of our favorite transcriptions. So it's an easy access list. Right, so we have our table views in each one. We have a table view cell in each one. Okay, so what do we want to do now? Well, let's give our table view cells an identifier. So we've done this before, a reuse identifier. Let's call this transcription table view cell, and we'll use that later on when we're trying to create cells. We'll go to the next one, our favorites. Make sure the cell is selected. Let's call this favorites table view cell. Okay, so we've set up our identifiers. Great. Now, what if we want to use navigation at this point? Right now, if let's say I clicked something in the table cell up here, I would have no way of pushing a new view controller because the tab bar controller only takes care of the tabs inside it. It doesn't take care of navigation. So what you need in a tab bar case is select a view controller, for example, this one. Go to, where are we? Editor, embed in nav controller. And now we have a nav controller that sits next to it. So the tab bar controller only knows to display this arm of our storyboard. Then the nav controller knows that it must display this table view. So these controllers with their grayish backgrounds don't actually show anything. That's an important point to know when it comes to development. Controllers don't show anything. View controllers show things. So we can do the same with this next one. So let's select it. Editor, embed in nav controller. Okay. Now, I know there are two nav controllers here, and you might be saying that seems like overkill, but it's not. Strangely, I have seen people tempted to try and use one nav controller for everything, which it just doesn't work. Just don't do that, please, whatever you do. Also, by doing it this way, the correct way, is you can have a different history in each tab that gets kept in memory. So you can stack more view controllers. Let's say you select a transcription, it goes to an edit screen. You can press share, it goes to a share screen. And then you have this hierarchy stored only in the first tab. And that doesn't affect the second tab. Okay, so it's very important for navigation in apps to get these setups right in the first place. Right, let's spruce this up a bit. Let's select this little tab bar on the first nav controller, and we can give this a system item if we like, something like history, and you'll see what the icon looks like there. We can leave the image as it is, but what else can we do? Well, it would be nice to have some colors in this app, so let's back up a little. Let's select this top nav bar. Let's change the tint to an other color. Let's use the color that I defined for this project, which is this one. And the unfortunate thing about designing like this is you need to copy that color over to the other nav controller. And if you want to change it, you've got to change it in two places, which kind of sucks, but that's the way it is. So I've changed the bar tint on that. And then if we want to, we can actually change the bar tint on the tab controller, or we can change the image tint. Let's see what white looks like. Okay. And then what do we want? Our bar tint to be also this color. So we can just click this old color that's stored for us, and there we have it. Right, so as usual, good point here is to open up our sim and see what this all looks like. So it doesn't look too bad so far, I think. And the more advanced you get as a developer, the more you'll be able to spruce things up much quicker because you understand the systems that lie behind them. Okay, so it's loading. Well, I know the first thing I'll have to change is the title color up at the top. Okay, so we've got history and we've got favorites, which has kind of disappeared into oblivion. But that's all right, we can fix that. And at the top, there is actually no, whoops, stop resizing it. At the top, there's no title, so we can change that, of course. We can first change the icon. Let's select favorites, which is a little star. And then up at the top of these, on the table view controllers, we can change the title of the item to transcriptions. And here we can have favorites. And then don't forget to change the nav bar in order to change the font color. So if we want white, we need to change it there. And don't forget that stupid Xcode bug that doesn't show it in here. We have to run it on a device or simulator to actually see the color change. Right, so there we go, got transcriptions and we've got favorites. Now I know it's a bit redundant that it's shown in two places, at the bottom and at the top, but that's what it is for now. We can always find ways around that. Okay, so we got already a nice good basic look for our app. We also need a way to add a transcription. So what we can do is put a bar button up in here under transcriptions. So if we just go to our filter at the bottom right and we type button, and I think we've used this before, we want a bar button item. So we can click and drag that, and you'll notice it automatically fills that out for us. Usually, the iOS design paradigm is to actually add the item a plus or a creation button on the right-hand top side. Okay, and we can give this a title if we want to, or we can just give it a system item of add. We can change its tint to white, and this does show in Xcode, which is nice for a change. We can add a title if we want to, but that does get rid of the icon. So if you remove the title, we need to change it back to add. Okay, so now we'll have a little plus icon. And of course, we'll get back to programming that much later on. Right, so what's missing? Here's a little quiz for you, a little pop quiz. What's missing? Well, these view controllers have no class. I think that was some sort of joke, but it was a bad one. Anyway, they have no class, no custom TableViewController class, so we have to go and create them. So let's do that. Let's have a new file. And we want Cocoa Touch because it's a type of ViewController class that we're doing. And we want a UI TableViewController type. And you can just scroll and select these if you want, or you can start typing and Xcode will autofill for you. Okay, so the first one we want is transcriptions. Whoops. TableViewController. Hit next and just save it in your project. And then we need another one, which is our favorites TableViewController. Hit next and create. That's right, so we have our two TableViewControllers. Let's go back to our storyboard and let's assign them. So first of all, transcriptions. Make sure you've set the TableViewController, and you'll know that because the class at the top right tells you what kind of class it is, and you'll be able to select your transcriptions. Then the same thing for favorites. And here you can see I haven't actually selected, I think, or have I? Or I've selected something else there. Because I don't have anything on the top right. So I think it's also selected the relationship. So what you can do is just select it in the list, and then your class will appear at the top right. And you can go to favorites. Press enter and save. So the table views are now set up. Now, normally at this point, I actually like to, or what do I like to do? I like to test the table view controllers. So what I want to do is populate these with some dummy data, if you like. So let's go to our transcriptions TableViewController file first. And let's put some dummy data in here. So we can just create a simple array called dummy items or something like that. We can delete this later, which is a string array, and this is equal to, and we're just going to put a few strings in here. So I'll just put G, R, A, doesn't matter if it's capital or anything, N, T. Okay, so we've got our dummy items. And remember, when you create this table view controller from a template, it does all the data source for you, all the functions you need. All you have to do is change the number of sections to 1. The number of rows in this section, this is just counting the data that we have. So let's go dummy items dot count. And then finally, we need to get the actual cell. So we need to uncomment this little section. We need to give it the reuse identifier. So I believe this was transcriptions table, be careful how you spell it, cell. And then we're just going to go cell dot and text label dot text is equal to our dummy items at indexPath.row. And bang, just like that, we should have our cells sorted. And we have some other stuff down here to edit our tables and whatnot, to move them to move our cells, navigation stuff. So we can ignore that for now. What we do need is a did select row at. And this will allow us to deselect the row. Remember that little gray bar that comes up? Well, we're going to get rid of that. Nip it in the bud right now. True. Okay, so let's play this on our sim. And our first tab, whoops, has failed miserably. What does it need? Oh, it needs an override. Okay, let's play. Oh dear. Now, if you click this little red icon at the top right in your little bar, you can see what it expects. Expected a separator. Oh, that's because I've made a mistake in the array. Save it, run it. It's always silly little mistakes that get you. I think I appear to have an error. I can see in the background here, it's telling me that I have some sort of error. Don't know what that's all about. So if we scroll up in our output, we have lots of horrendous messages. There we go. Unable to dequeue a cell with identifier transcriptions table view cell. And that's what I mean about getting it right the first time. Let's go to our storyboard. Let's go to our transcriptions, go to the cell, and our transcription is what I should have. So let's go to our transcriptions table view controller and correct that. So that's the crash I was talking about that can happen when you get that wrong. And I have another error. What is the error here? Transcription table view. It's still wrong. Well, let's see. What have I done? Let's get our cell. Oh, I forgot the S. Right, so like I keep saying, I should follow my own advice. Copy that. Let's go over to our file and paste it to make sure it's the same. Now let's play it on our sim. And hopefully I've done it right this time. There we go. We have our cells and we have our deselect. Right, so that's sorted. We can do the same in favorites, and I think we should, just to make sure that we've got everything right. So what we can do is just copy over the dummy items, first of all, Command-C, go over to our favorites ViewController, drop our dummies in there. Let's go back to our transcriptions. We can simply actually copy over all of this table view stuff, because it should be more or less the same, apart from, you guessed it, the identifier for the table view cell. So let's go see what that is in the main storyboard. Favorites. I think I'll change that to favorite table view cell. Go over to our file and paste it in. Okay, now let's hit play. And we should now have a favorites table view. Rockin' and rollin'. So Grant and favorites. And they scroll a bit. We don't have enough data to scroll off the screen yet, but we can leave it as is. And also we can check that little plus icon in the top corner. That all works. We are more or less good to go. Okay, so let's stop that running. Let's go back to our storyboard. And this is the last thing we're going to do in this section, is actually setting up our permissions screen. Now, just before we do that, the reason we're setting up a screen for permissions is that when our app first actually loads, we can, as usual, ask our user for permission. So whatever tab they're in, they can ask for permission. Now, we know from experience this is simply an alert controller that pops up that allows a user to click OK or cancel or whatever it is, or decline. That could cause an issue because this app completely depends on permissions. Without it, the app cannot run. So when it comes to apps like that, I personally like to have a separate screen that is shown to the user if there is no permission for the thing that we need, that specifically outlines what they need to do. And also, additionally, it gets them to press a button which brings up the pop-up to grant permissions. So they know what they've done, they've read it, they know what's going on. It's an important thing to note because, and I don't mean to be rude about users, but you get a lot of stupid users. And they will give you 1 star because they don't understand permissions, or more likely, you haven't actually explained what's going on to them. So this is my default way of asking for important permissions. I grab a ViewController, bottom right. I'll drop it in. This isn't attached to the tabs or the navigation controllers. This is going to be completely standalone and is going to show over whatever we have and will not allow the user to go further until they actually grant permissions. Okay, so we have our ViewController. Now this ViewController, if we click our class inspector, it doesn't have a class yet. We'll create one, obviously, but it does have a storyboard ID. And this is how we're going to reference it. I think I've done this before with you. So permissions, ViewController, VC. So that's how we're going to actually reference this ViewController. Right, so let's give it a little bit of a sprucing up, shall we? Let's select the main view of it. Let's change that view's background. And we should have a color history somewhere. There we go. We can have that same pinky red color. And what do we need? Well, we need some text to explain what's going on to our user. This is going to be a text view. So this allows multiple lines of text, as you can see. Now, inside of the attributes section, we can drop some text to our user. Say, this app needs access to your microphone in order to transcribe your speech effectively. Click allow to grant access. Okay, and then we can just smooth this out, put it in the middle. We can change the color of the font. So we're doing a white font. And now we need to get rid of that background. So let's scroll down, change our background. Oops, that's disappeared. Background to clear. So clear makes it see-through. We can go back up. We can increase the font. I'm selecting the wrong thing here. We'll just do it with the pop-up box. And done. Okay, so we now have a little access screen message. Let's drop in a button, just a regular old button. Double click and call it allow. Change its color to white and turn up the font size. And we can drop it somewhere in the center, like so. Okay, so we can just position stuff now. Let's get this text field. Let's drop it horizontally, vertically in the center. We can offset this item by double-clicking it minus, I don't know, 130. Does that do it? That was pretty close, wasn't it? That was very close. Let's give it a width and a height. And, or actually, I'm going to drop that down a bit. I'm going to position my button in the center. I'm going to give that button a fixed width. Something nice and wide. Oh, and a fixed height. Nice and large, the user can press it. And then let's just, let's control click and drag to the label and give it some vertical spacing. Okay, and then you can shuffle these things around according to your taste. So we want this button to be very, very prominent. So we can increase the size to do that. Okay, I think that doesn't look too bad. There's lots of shuffling you can do. You can actually justify the text in here to make it look a little better. I think that looks a little bit neater. Let's just change this S here, transcribe your speech. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, the final thing we do is create a ViewController that goes with this. So add a new file, Cocoa Touch class, and we want a plain old ViewController. And we will call this Permissions ViewController. Next, and create. Go back to the storyboard, and let's assign it in the class inspector. Save your project, and we are more or less done with the whole UI of our app. So you can see that's only taken us about half an hour to go from beginning to almost the end of setting up our UI. Obviously, there are tweaks down the road, but I mean, look at it. It's pretty impressive as it stands. We've made a nice coherent color scheme, just on the off chance, just by using the inbuilt elements, and we've added all the screens that we're likely to need. Now, what's not obvious, and what I haven't included in this section, is the fact that I prepared for this. I actually wrote stuff on paper. And if you're part of the new generation, paper is this really old technology. or you can just write on it. It's like an Apple Pencil, but it's just called Pencil. It's amazing. Sorry, I'm being sarcastic. It's my nature. But if you have an app idea, write it down on paper. Plan these things out. And then you can come over to your storyboards and bam, you can get the whole thing out on a storyboard and then program from that point. And that makes your whole life a lot easier once you can view the entirety of your app and what it's going to look like in the future. Now that we've got our app more or less set up in terms of graphics, it's time to do a little bit of coding. So now we're going to check and request permission for microphone and speech recognition if that is something that we have to do, depending on the result of the check. So in a way, we're kind of hijacking the process that Apple implements for doing this kind of thing, for asking for permissions. We need to do that because our app completely depends on these permissions, so we have to stop the user in their tracks so that they can make the app work correctly. So let's open up Xcode and see what I'm talking about. Right, so here we are with our basic app, sort of laid out in our storyboard. And recall we have this ViewController that tells us if the user hasn't actually granted access yet, or it shows when the user first loads the app so that they can click allow and grant access. Okay, so what we're going to do is start programming this, but first we need a way to actually check if we should show that screen or not. And the way to do that is to check the existing permissions. And the obvious place to do that is in this very first ViewController, Transcriptions, that shows as the first tab in our app. So when that loads, we'll check the permissions. If they're not right, we're going to fire up this extra ViewController to allow the user to allow everything or give them a different kind of message. Okay, so let's go over to our Transcriptions ViewController. I believe that's what I called it. Yep, TableViewController. Now, first of all, inside of here, we have to import a couple of things. The first thing we need to import is what's called the AV Foundation. And that stands for Audio Video Foundation. And we need that in order to check for recording permissions and that kind of thing. Then we're also going to import speech. And speech is related to SiriKit and allowing us to grab permissions for transcription and that kind of thing. Right, now let's create a function that's going to check the existing permissions. So anywhere in your ViewController, outside of this table view source, of course, because we want to keep our sections separate, let's have a func for check permissions. Open and close our braces. Okay, now the first thing we're going to see is if we have authorized recording permissions. So let rec authorized is equal to, and this comes from the AV audio session shared instance dot record permission. Okay, so if we've got that and it is equal to the dot granted category, there it is, then we can do something with it. So what I've just done here is a little Swift trick. We have, and if I just move this stuff out the way on the sides, you can see it all in one line. We have this single line, but we have an equals and an equals equals. And what I'm saying is let record auth, this will be a Boolean that it ends up with, I believe. If we just hover over it, it might tell us. No, it doesn't, whatever. We're saying if this is equal to this, then we're going to set this. So this could end up as true or false. Is our recording authorized? Okay, so that's just a little Swift shorthand there, rather than taking two lines in order to do it, or saying if statement or something like that. Then we're going to check if our transcription is authorized. And this comes out of the SF speech recognizer class dot, and this is simply the authorization status, and we'll do the same trick if it's equal to dot authorized. Now I wish they would, I think that's the one, yes. I wish they would give these words the same, or use the same syntax rather, in these different items, but it is what it is. They'll probably change that eventually so everything matches up and makes sense for us. So now we have two variables to see if we're authorized for recording and to see if we are authorized for transcription. Okay, now we'll do another little advanced programming trick, is we're going to actually combine record auth and transcribe auth, because if you think about it, both of these have to be true for us to operate the app correctly. So we can make a single Boolean called let auth is equal to record auth, and then we type and transcribe auth. So this combines the Booleans, and if one of these is false, then auth will be false. Auth will be true only if both of these are true. Okay, it's a little handy trick for you. So we're really condensing our code down these days. Now we can check if not auth. So if we're not authorized, then we're going to do something. Show auth ViewController, and we'll fill the code in a little bit. Else we can do something else. Well, what else do we actually need to do? If we're authorized, we can continue to use the app. There's nothing to check for. So we don't actually need an else. We can leave that out. Okay, so now we can fill in this code inside of the if statement. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show that authorization ViewController that comes from our main storyboard. So this one here. So we have to grab it, and this could end up being optional. So if let VC is equal to self.storyboard dot, and we've done this before, instantiate ViewController with an identifier. And this is going to be a string. And let's check in our storyboard again exactly what that string was. Permissions VC. So I've learned from my mistakes, guys. I'm going to get it right. Permissions VC. So if we can get that ViewController, then let's do something with it, such as showing it. How do we show it? Well, we need a NavigationController that takes care of the stack that's shown to our user that we're going to put the ViewController on. So, NavigationController. And you'll notice this is optional, and it might not exist because you might not have one. And that's why we embedded one inside of our tabs. Now you'll notice right at the top it says up here, the nearest ancestor in the ViewController hierarchy that is a NavigationController. So this is going to navigate up the tree to the beginning in our storyboard and find the first ViewController that's actually closest to, or rather, it's going to find the first NavController that's actually closest to this ViewController. So that's something to bear in mind for more complex apps. So it's optional, and we are going to present our ViewController. We are going to animate it, and on completion, well, we don't actually have to do anything. Okay, so let's fire check permissions inside of ViewDidLoad. And save it. Right, let's run this in our simulator. And because we haven't actually asked for any permissions yet, this should simply display that screen on top of what we currently have, and there we have it. So obviously allow doesn't do anything, But you'll notice what's important here is that we are completely blocked inside of this screen. We can move this text around, fine, whatever. Actually, can we change this text? Oh, it turns out we can. So we'll change that back, but I want you to notice that the user can't use the app unless they allow permissions. So let's stop that running. Let's just fix that little annoying scrolling editing thing. So let's click the text box or the text field in our storyboard and adjust its properties. We can switch off editable and we can switch off selectable. And that should take care of allowing the user to edit the message. It doesn't do us any harm because so what if they edit it? It doesn't matter. Okay, so now we have to get the actual permissions. And if you recall, we need to open up our info.plist in order to get these. So we need to add a key to it. So we hover at the top, click plus, and we start to search for privacy. And this is going to be to do with microphone usage description. And we have to give it a value, and this is what's shown to the user. And what shall we call this? Let's see. Transcriber So we don't really need this to be very detailed because we already have detail on that screen we've created. So that's the privacy for the microphone. We need to actually add another key. And this key is NS speech recognition usage description. And hit enter. And what I just showed you there was the alternative way to put these properties in. They have a long name and they have a descriptive name. So it's changed the descriptive name for us. And you can put them in either way. It doesn't really matter. Okay, what shall we have for this? Transcriber needs to, let's see. Needs this permission. I really can't spell anything today. Needs this permission to transcribe your audio. It's totally up to you if you want to say we do not collect your audio in any way. Or we do not, let's see, use your audio in any other way, because people are quite wary these days of privacy. Okay, so we've got our two permissions sorted. Now we just need to ask for permission, and that comes from our allow button when we click it, this one. So let's go over to its storyboard, which is the permissions view controller. And well, we need to go back actually, and we need to outlet that button. So open up the assistant, control, click and drag, allow button, clicked, and then we can action it and connect it. Great, so we can come back to editing our permissions view controller code, and inside of here we're actually going to request permissions. So let's create a function first of all to request our record permissions. And after that, we'll also create a function to request transcribe permissions. Okay, now what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to get the recording permissions, which is fine. And then if we get those, then we'll move on to ask for transcription. So we won't ask for them both at the same time. So we'll have a little cascade going, and inside of our allow button clicked, we're going to have request record permissions, first of all. Okay, so how do we get them? Well, we need our AV audio session. So at the top, we have to import AV Foundation. And we also have to import speech. That's for the transcription permissions. Right, let's ask for audio permission. So AV audio session dot shared instance dot request record permission. Okay, so we can press enter and it will fill everything for us. Now this Boolean returns whether we actually have permission or not, and we can call this allowed, and then we can test allowed in our code. So if we are allowed, then we can request transcribe permissions. If we're not allowed, we can perhaps send some kind of error message to ourselves, the developers, or to the user themselves. And this one, of course, needs to have self. Okay, now we come down to requesting our transcription permissions, which comes from SF speech recognizer dot request authorization. So again, I don't like how they change the wording between these things, but anyway, just hit enter on the autocomplete. And then inside of here, it's going to return you an authorization status. And in the code, we can check it. So if the auth status is true, and we can't just have it as this because it's not a Boolean, so we have to compare it to its type, which is dot authorized. So it'll complete in a second, come on. Or I'll just do it. Thanks, Xcode. Open and close our braces. So let's just double check that Xcode knows what we're doing here. We've got no errors, that's good. Right, so if it's authorized, we are good to go. And that means we can dismiss this ViewController. So self.dismiss, animate it, and on completion, do nothing. And totally up to you if you want to write error message here to yourself. Okay, so that's fine. Here we've got our thing called in allow button clicked. Great. Now I'm going to play this on our sim. And we should see everything working very, very nicely. So we can click allow. Transcriber would like to access speech recognition. Okay. And it turns out we already have microphone use, I think. But let's double check that. Let's go to the settings in our phone. Let's go to privacy, microphone. And it turns out we don't actually have the microphone. So what's actually happening with microphone? I mean, we have speech recognition. That's fine. So let's go back here. Stop this running. And actually, let's see what's going on. Because obviously, it's come through and it's allowed it. Otherwise, we wouldn't get the request for this happening, which we clearly saw happening. So there's something very strange going on here. Now, what could it be? Well, the first step when you're doing these things is you can check your code. We know we've got an info plist. That's the most important bit. And we know the code has fallen through to ask for transcriptions. So what I'm going to do is plug in my iPad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it on the iPad. And I'm going to make sure it asks me for microphone, because the simulator can have issues around hardware devices. So if you want to do this, just plug in your device to your Mac, click Trust Computer or whatever shows, and then hit play on it, and you're going to get a build failed. Because signing for Transcriber requires a development team. Okay, so what you need to do is just sign up for an Apple developer account, not the paid one, just the free one. Just go look for it on Google, you'll find it immediately. Sign up for it, go to Xcode, Preferences, yes, go to Accounts, click the plus icon, and sign in with your Apple ID. And once you've done that, simply clean your product and then try to run it on your device again. And it requires a development team. Okay, so once you've signed in, go over to your project folder structure, click the very top project, and click your team, and it will do everything you need to. So what I did there is click Transcriber Solution at the top, General tab, and then you can select the team, which is under here, and it does everything that you need it to do from that point. So now I can hit play. Hopefully I don't have to clean it, and it's going to automatically get the certificates and permissions that it needs to run on the iPad. So the build has succeeded. And well, rather than stop and just show you what's on the iPad, I'm just going to talk you through what I'm seeing on the iPad. So it's loading slowly but surely, I think. It's an iPad Mini 2, so it's a little slow, a little on the slow side there. So I've got the screen, that's the permissions screen. I'm clicking allow, and it asks me if I want to access the microphone, and I've clicked OK. And then the speech recognition, I've clicked OK, and the permissions screen has disappeared. So we can stop that running, and we know it does actually work. Right, so from now on, we can use the simulator for most of this. We might need to use the iPad again at some point. But we know that it works. So again, there's a lesson for you. Test on a real device. It helps a lot. Okay, now, there's something that's lurking and waiting to get us. So if we go to our simulator again, and we go to, I know we don't have microphones, so don't worry about it. Or do we? Maybe in hardware we could enable one. Nope, I'm just hoping for hope there. Anyway, let's go to speech recognition and let's deauthorize Transcriber. Okay, then let's close that. Let's double click the home button and swipe off Transcriber. And then let's run it again. Okay, so we revoked permission, and so it came out as false. Let's click allow. And we get nothing shown, but we know this works. So what's going on? Well, in order for apps not to annoy their users, Apple has made it so you only get one chance to grant permissions with a pop-up. After that, you actually have to change the permissions in settings yourself as the user, and there's nothing your app can do about it. It's very annoying, but that's how it is. Right, so let's fix it. Let's go to our Permissions View Controller. And you'll notice that in here, we've got our view did load. And so what are we going to do? I'm just trying to think. Well, the first thing we can do actually is check if we fall through to here, perhaps this error message will show. So let's drop an else into here. Like so. And let's print something back to ourselves. And let's say error here. So we're just going to run this, and we're just doing this so we can see where the errors bubble through to. Oh, we've got the usual trouble. So we're going to run this, and we have our usual issue. So when we click allow, we don't get the pop-up like we expect, and we have error here. So when we click allow, it actually brings us to this point. So that's fine. What we can actually do here is we can change the label text on our main label. So is that outletted? It isn't. So let's go to our main storyboard, and let's change this label text. So you can give the user a pop-up here, or you just change this text. It's totally up to you. So let's outlet this. Control, click and drag. And we can just call this, oh, it's not label, it's a text view. We can just call this text view. Simple as that. Then let's also outlet the button itself, not the click, but the button. And you'll see why we're doing that in a minute. So let's come back to our ViewController. We have our button and text view now sorted out. And so if we have an error, we should probably create a function to show error state. And what are we going to do here? Well, first of all, we're obviously going to call it self.showErrorState. And the first thing we're going to do is grab our text field, which should be, text view dot text, and we can set some text for it. Is equal to, and we can change the text to reflect the fact that the user has denied our app permissions. You have previously denied this app access to speech recognition or microphone. Please open settings manually and change these. And then perhaps tell them, no, we'll leave it at that. Or say this is an Apple requirement. So totally blame Apple for this, because it is their fault. They won't let you have another pop-up. Okay, and then what else should we do? Well, we should get our button, and we should disable the button itself. So disable, or rather, button.isEnabled is equal to false. And how does your user know that that is the case? Well, we should have a little animation. UIView dot animate with duration, just a really simple one. Let's say over half a second. Go over to animations and hit enter. And let's drop in some code. Self.button.alpha is equal to 0.3. So that's going to dim the button down. Okay, sorted. So we can save that, and we can run that on our iPhone. And now we'll get perhaps a much better flow, so the user understands what's going on and what the user themselves has done, not us. So we need our permission, click allow, and we have an error. And I knew we were going to get an error at some point. I just thought we'd come sooner than this. So what's happening? Well, if we go all the way down this error, let's look at what we can get in terms of clues. Enqueued from speech recognition thread 5, thread 1. So there's a subtle clue here that you need to be aware of. We've got two threads complaining, thread 5 and thread 1. And you don't have to know what it means in each one, but you do have to know, we've got thread 3 and 4 too. You do have to know that we are actually mixing threads. And I believe I've told you about this before, in that when we request stuff and we get a callback, which is what this is, it's not necessarily on the main user interface thread. It could be on a different thread. And that is going to cause you issues when you try to show an error state and you change stuff on the main thread. So here is where you have the error. You're trying to change this text view from a different thread and you cannot do that. So, and we've covered this before, what we have to do is drop this onto the main thread, which happens to be the dispatch queue dot main dot async. And all async means here is it'll do it when it's damn well ready. And then we can take all of this code, cut it, and paste it. Here we have the error. You see this purple error? It's about to disappear. Set text must be called from main thread only. So it's nice that they warn you about that now. Okay, so that should fix that. And whilst we're here, let's look at this. Self.dismiss, I think that runs on the main thread. So we should have a dispatch queue.main.async running here, and we should cut this code and paste it in here, just to be sure. And save it. So now we can run it and we can actually go back to what I was talking about before I was rudely interrupted by a thread crash. Now when we click allow, you have previously denied this app access to speech recognition or microphone. Please open settings manually and change these. This is an Apple requirement. And you'll notice allow has dimmed down. So what we should do is make this text field just a bit bigger in our main storyboard so we can fit everything we have there. Perhaps 170 will do it. Let's hit play and let's double check everything. So we're starting to get a decent flow for our app. And flow is very important in the app world. I forget what the stats are, but if someone has to do too many clicks, they'll actually delete your app because of that. So if you're going to make them click stuff, make sure they know why. So allow, you've denied. So we can go back. We can go to our settings. We can follow our own instructions for speech recognition on. We're going to go back to our transcriber and it loads up without any issues. So great. Everything works. That's how we get the permissions that we need. And also, I think more importantly, it's how we bubble through the various permission requests that we need. By no means is this the only way to do this. There's tons of other ways to do it, but you get the idea. And then also we've looked at being careful when we're not on the main thread when we're updating stuff. Right, so that completes that lesson. Now that we've got our permissions, we're ready to record. So what we're going to look at in this section is, first of all, the file structure, the very basic file structure in iOS, and where we're actually going to store our recordings. And following that, we're actually going to set up and get ready to record some audio. So we're going to have some files that we can store our audio and our transcriptions in, and then we'll actually move on to setting up the microphone for recording. So open up Xcode, we'll discover where we put files, and let's get started. The first step we're going to take is to create my favorite file, which is a utilities file in our project, which is a basic Swift file, of course, and is named utilities. Go ahead and create that, and then create the class of utilities. And let's get started. So the first thing we actually need in our iOS system is to get the documents directory. Now this documents directory is the directory that belongs to this particular app. And in iOS, every app is sandboxed, and that means apps can't talk to each other's document directories, at least not easily, and at least not with a whole bunch of permissions. So, obviously that's good for security. Let's create a function called getDocsDirectory. And this is going to return something you might not expect it to return, which is a URL. And you're probably thinking of a URL as something you see on the web, but URL actually stands for Universal Resource Location or something like that. And what it means is it can actually point to a remote server, or as the description says here, to a path to a local file. So in iOS, a URL can actually point to a file on the system. Right, so let paths equal. Now, why have I put paths? Because what I'm about to type could return more than one path. And what are we about to type? Well, we're actually going to go and find where our document directory is. And this comes from our file manager. The default version of the file manager dot URLs for directory. So if you hit enter, it'll autofill for you, and it asks you for a search path directory. And this is .document directory, and it asks for a file manager search path domain mask, which is the current user's domain mask. And this is the user's home directory, the place to install user's personal items. Now that sort of implies that at some point iOS, or maybe already iOS, has the functionality to have multiple users for a device. Okay, so this could return more than one URL. I don't know the exact technical reasons for it, but I know it does. And you know that if you hover over or just type URLs again, it tells you it returns an array of URLs. Okay, so for now, we're just going to grab the very first one that it returns because we can write to it. So let docs directory equal to those paths we just captured and get the one at index 0. So this URLs is always going to return at least one directory. It's not optional, so we know it's going to give us something. And then we're going to return the docs directory. And we'll save that file. So now we've got the documents directory. That's very handy. It's inside of that documents directory that we're actually going to store our audio file. So we need to get the URL for our audio file. So let's create that in here, which is a function, get audio file URL. And this is going to return, you guessed it, a URL. Now, this is going to be actually optional because this could actually fail. So just make some room, shift this up for you, and we'll see why it could fail in a minute. Because this is going to fail, this could fail, we're going to have a do catch statement like so, and we're going to fill out our code inside of do. So this is the bit that could fail. Let audio URL equal to try, and we're going to try and get the docs directory, and that is this that we've just created. So we know that works, but what we're going to do to that, because we're returning a URL, we can use all of URL's methods and functions. And what we're going to do is try to append a path component. And that basically means just append a file name to this. So we've got the directory, we're going to put the audio file name onto it. And the audio file name is going to be something like file dot and M4A. That's the file extension and the audio container that we're going to use. Okay, and if that works, we are going to return an audio URL. Otherwise, if this fails, then we're going to return nil, and that means we can check this optional later on. Now, if we return the same file name as a file that already exists in this directory, we're going to overwrite it, and obviously that's not a great idea for our app if you can only use one file. So we need a changing file name here. So I'm going to delete this file, and what we're going to do is we're going to get date and time plus. So we're going to create a function to get the current date and time, and that's going to return a more or less unique string because you record things, you move on in time. If it's 1 second later, you now have a new different file name. So this is just a standard way I like to program stuff. Put date and time as file names. It works really, really well. So let's get a date and time function set up. Which is going to return a nice simple string. And then, as usual, you should know how this works by now. We get a new date object. We create a date formatter, like so. We give the formatter a date format, which is simply a string. And as I've referred to previously, this string takes certain items such as year, month, day, hour, minutes, seconds. So we know that from second to second, this is going to be a unique item, unless your user changes time zone, but that's a whole different case. But even then, the chances of them creating the same file at the same date and having traveled across time zones is extremely, extremely low. Well, I say it's low, but you never know till the bug reports start coming in. Right, so let's create the time string is equal to formatter dot string from the date we've created. Whoops. And then let's return that time string. Okay, so we've done all that. That's all good. But you're an advanced developer now, so I want to show you a couple of tricks that I do just to reduce my code load, if you like. So let's let date. It's pretty standard to create a new date, so we can remove that. And we can actually fill in the date new object here. There's no need to do it somewhere else. We have our let formatter equals that. I think we do need 2 lines for that. There's nothing we can actually do. And then we can return the time string, but we can remove that and we can simply return this result. So again, I've reduced from 5 lines to 3 and it's still very readable. Okay, so now we have our get date and time and we can return that audio URL. So let's click this item. No calls to throwing functions occur within try expression. Right, so I think this has actually changed. So if we type this again, it doesn't tell us that this throws anything. That's interesting to know. Okay, so the old version of this used to throw an error, but now it actually doesn't, which means we actually don't need any of this do catch. So that's something that's changed lately. In Swift, we can remove try as well. Okay, so you learn something new every day. Right, so now we've set up everything we need. We can get the file URL via the docs directory and get date time, and we're more or less guaranteed to have a unique file name. Right, now the next thing we're going to do is set up a screen for the actual recording. This is a screen to show the user, allow them to click a button to actually set up the microphone. So the first step, of course, is go to our storyboard and let's create a ViewController for that functionality. So zoom out a touch. Let's click and drag in a ViewController, perhaps somewhere up here. Yeah, you can just shift this one down and put this one on top. Okay, so we've got our ViewController. Now this ViewController is going to show when the user clicks this plus icon. So we can do that outside of code and simply in storyboards by control-clicking the plus and dragging it to the ViewController. And then we can show this, we can present it modally. It's totally up to us. So if you show it, iOS will give you the back button by default. If you present modally, you need to create your own back button. So I think we'll show it. And you'll notice up at the top, we now have the back button. Okay, so this is going to be our recording screen. So we need a record ViewController file to go with this. So let's add a new file. Cocoa Touch class. Record ViewController, hit next. And just create it. Now we can go back to our storyboard and we can assign this file to the ViewController in the class inspector. And we are more or less ready to go. So it's a good point right here to actually test this on our sim because we've done a little bit of messing around with utilities and our ViewControllers. And as I always say, it's good to test things early and often because it's the best way to find bugs before they become deeply embedded in your app and it becomes a real pain to debug those. You can take it from someone who knows. They've done it often enough. Come on, you can do it. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I've got a new laptop for recording, and it's much, much faster than the old version. Right, so we've got our transcriptions. Let's click the plus, and we have our transcriptions. I've really got to change that. But that plus works, and we've got no errors. So let's stop that. Let's change that transcriptions to transcriptions. Okay, so everything works. Now let's set up our record ViewController, where we're going to set up the actual recording part of our app. So let's import, first of all, the audio video foundation. It's the basics of everything we need. And because we're transcribing, we're also going to import the speech class. Now, we need to actually set up this ViewController to conform to what's called the AV Audio Recorder Delegate. Now, what that means is the delegate actually takes care of all the notifications and the firing off of functions that are related to the microphone and external audio things that might actually happen. For example, if your app receives a telephone call whilst you're recording, you need to be able to handle that in some way. So let's set this up as the AV Audio Recorder Delegate. Okay, now with this, there is actually nothing you have to include by default. So it's pretty handy. You've set up, you're ready to go. But of course, we'll want to record some, or we'll want to set up some things. So first of all, I'm just going to make some room. I'm going to remove these items that we have default here. So we can always add them if we need them. But I like you guys to see a nice clean screen. Right. Now, like I said, if a call comes in, we need to actually handle that. So let's create our function called audio recorder did finish recording. So, well, apologies, this isn't actually to do with phone calls. This is to do with the recorder has finished recording, like the user's pressed stopped, or we've reached a time limit, there's no space on this system. So my apologies for saying the wrong thing there. But what this actually does is this fires when a user presses stop recording, or like I say, you've run out of space or something. And it fires automatically because this is the delegate. So we don't actually have to call stop recording, it does it all for us. Now, inside of here, we're going to check if we have finished successfully. So this is the flag. So if the flag is false, then we're going to do something because we failed to record. Else, we're going to do something because recording success. Okay, so we've got those basic frameworks set up. Let's just put a comment here, recording failed. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go off and process everything that we have. So we should have some functions for that, like a recording ended function. And this is going to take a success flag of a bool, and we'll do something. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pass over this flag here. So we're going to say recording ended, give it the flag. And actually, we don't need this if else, do we? Because if you think about it, this bool is correct. So I'm going to remove the if else for now. It's a bit redundant. And I'm simply going to do that. Now you might say, why have you split this into two? Well, it's just simply good programming practice in case you start adding things later on. Always err on the side of too many functions rather than too few. Okay, so we've more or less taken care of the framework of recording ended. Now we need a function to record the audio. Okay, now when we record audio, we actually need two items. And the first of these, and we're going to have these as class level variables, is an instance of the AV audio recorder itself. And this is the thing that's actually going to take care of taking your speech in and recording it to a file and encoding it to a file. So var audio record is of type AV audio, and look how many AV audio things are, tons of them. And we want, in particular, AV audio recorder. So you can read the description, tells you everything you need to know. And then we need a URL for that file. So var recorded file URL is a URL. Whoops, there we go. Now, the audio recorder and the URL, we can actually make these optional if we want to. So we can make this optional to double check it exists, and we can do the same here as well. Right, then all we have to do is actually set some bits and pieces up. So for this recorded file URL, inside of record audio, we should first set up that URL from utilities. Sorry, I'm thinking very slowly today. I think I need a coffee. So a recorded file URL is equal to utilities dot get audio file URL. Now you might be tempted actually to get this and put it in view.load, but that would be a mistake because there's a little bug waiting to get you. If you load this screen up, you record some audio, and then you say, nah, I don't like that, re-record, your recorded file URL is going to be the same when you re-record or record something else. And so if you fire up the URL in ViewDidLoad, it's going to be the same, and you're going to overwrite the same file, which isn't good. Overwriting is not a great way of programming. You always want to check these things. So what we're doing here when we record the audio is we're creating a new file. Now, it's just the way I program. You can actually put this in ViewDidLoad and then restrict your user to only recording a single file on this screen, or perhaps give them a warning saying if they re-record, they're going to overwrite the file. So just something to be aware of. Right. Now we can print this out if we like. Let's have our recorded file URL, and we know it exists. Dot, and you have to ask for an absolute string for this to actually print it out. Okay, so for now, let's just fire this off in the record audio ViewDidLoad. Let's run it on our simulator, and let's see what it comes up with. So we should get that URL printed out to us. So when we click plus, there we have it. So down here, that is where your simulator is contained. So you'll notice you've got, this is on Mac, by the way, obviously. You've got your devices, you have your device ID. Inside of that device, you have a data, container, data, application, the ID of your application, that application's documents, and then the file name itself. So you can see at a handy stroke the whole setup of the file system on iOS when it comes to your app's storage. Okay, so we're set up. We've got our very basic template to record audio. Now in the next section, we're actually going to look at setting up the microphone and the audio recording session, and there are a few pitfalls here and there when we do that, but we'll see what they are, and we'll finally be able to record some audio. Righty, now that we've set up our document directories, we've done a little bit of preparation for getting the file name that we're actually going to record into. We're now going to look at actually recording from the microphone. Now, there are a couple of steps in this, and as you'd imagine, it's quite complex because your mobile device only has one microphone that has to be shared between all devices. So what we're going to do in this section is actually see how Apple constructs things, not just for the microphone, but for a lot of things. The pattern is very similar. How we ask for permissions to use those things, such as the microphone, and then how we go about receiving the permission and executing what we need to do. So open up Xcode and let's have a look. Now, we're going to be working in this lecture primarily in this screen that appears when we click the plus icon at the top. And this screen is going to allow us to record our audio. Don't worry about the blue colors at the top. We're going to pretty this up a little later on in this module. For now, we'll just concentrate on the recording. So, our recording is primarily done inside of this record ViewController. And we've populated this ViewController with a couple of functions. We have one to record the audio, which gets our file URL, and it also prints it out back to us so we as developers know where it is. Our ViewDidLoad doesn't have actually anything happening in there yet, so we're not actually instantiating any recording. We have this AV audio recorder delegate, and that allows us to tap into a few methods that get called, such as audio recorder did finish recording. And we've set up a little function to take care of the end of recording, and that's probably going to be the place where we transcribe stuff. So at the moment, it's all a bit bitty and all over the place, it seems. And don't worry about it for now. We've got the basic bare necessities, to quote a famous movie. Right, so we're going to do all of our functionality inside of record audio for recording audio, as you might guess. So first of all, we actually need to create an audio session. So let session equal to, and this comes out of AV audio session. And if you look at the description, it says this communicates to the system how you intend to use audio in your app. Because, like I said, there's only one microphone, and iOS needs to know how you want to use that microphone. So what we're going to get from here is we're going to get the shared instance. And this is the instance of audio that's shared between all of the apps. And once we've got that, we're going to try to set a category of audio playback or recording. So that's simple enough. We just say session dot set category, and we give this a category, and we want this particular second version, which we give a category to the system, and we're also going to give it some options that we would actually like. So let's hit enter. Now, what's the category? Well, this category is a string, and this describes AV audio. Let's see if I can remember this correctly. Session category. And there we have all of our options. We've got record, ambient, playback, multi-route, etc. And these are all things you can play with, but we just want play and record because we're going to record something and play it back. So we're asking for that permission, if you like. It's not really a permission, but we can think of it like that to make things easier. And then with the AV audio category options, audio session category options, sorry, there's a lot of words there, dot, and we're going to give this some options, and we're going to default to the speaker. We can automatically put this out to AirPlay, Bluetooth, etc. We're just going to default to the speaker. It's pretty standard stuff. If you're going to make an app in the future that puts audio out to Bluetooth or AirPlay or whatever it is, it's always a good idea, generally speaking, to make sure everything works with this default setting, default to speaker. Once you know that on your iPhone, iPad, then you can start doing more advanced stuff. So it's just a little tip for you. Right, now we have a red error, and I knew this was going to happen because this call can throw. And that means this can throw an error because you might not actually get it. So we have to try it. And then because we're trying it, we have to put this into a do and catch block. So we're going to do something, and then we are going to catch any errors that happen. So catch, let error. And that's the whole block set up for us. So that error should go away now. And down here, of course, we can have print failed to record. And we can add on the error dot localized description to give us some more details. Right, so we're setting our session. Now, that's not all we have to do with the session. We actually have to try to set it active. And again, this could throw an error. So try session.set active. And you'll notice it says throws in that little autocomplete there. So let's set this active as true, obviously. And the reason that this could fail is because if we're setting this and someone's on the phone call at the same time, it's probably not going to kick them off the phone call in order to do this. After all, the iPhone is a phone, so the phone is going to take priority over everything else. That's just the way it is. Right, now we need some settings because we've set our audio session, we're ready to record, but our device doesn't know how to record or what codecs or formats to record into. So rather than relying on the default stuff that comes with the system, I'm going to show you how to create a settings array. And this settings array is going to contain a whole bunch of keys and values that will specify what we are recording to. So this is something you need to think carefully about for any apps you make in the future that record stuff, because you have to be sure that your files are perhaps cross-platform compatible. You don't want to have to re-encode them to share them to YouTube or something like that, whatever your system, your app requirements are. So the first thing we're going to start with is the AV format D key, ID key. And this is the format identifier. And this is an integer which comes from K audio, oops, it should be a K audio. And you'll notice we have all of our formats. You may recognize some of these, AC3, etc., etc. If you want to stick to something you know is going to work, then MPEG-4 is something you want to aim for. So if we keep scrolling, look how many there are. There are tons. iOS is a great system for the amount of formats you can have. So there are so many. Let's nail this down to format MPEG. We can have 4, and we just want standard AAC, which is at the top here. So AAC stands for Apple Audio Codec, I believe. Okay, so that's the format. Then we have to give it an AV sample rate key. And this is 44,100. You can increase the sample rate, you can decrease it. If you don't know what these are, then by all means, Google it. It's pretty easy to understand. But basically, it's the sort of bit rate. We can tell it the number of channels. AV number of channels key. So we would like stereo. Now, because we're recording from our device's microphone, I don't think we can actually get stereo. But if we had an external mic connected, chances are pretty good that you can get stereo on that. So it's always best to default to 2. Your files will be slightly larger, or probably double the size actually, but it's just good practice to include 2 channels. Right, now we're going to have the AV encoder audio quality key. So we're just setting the quality here. AV audio quality dot, and we can have high, low, medium, etc. So I'm going to have high on this dot raw value, and we require the integer for it because this is actually an array of integers, and it's those integers that gets passed over as settings. I don't know why they're integers and not strings, but there's probably a good reason for it. Right, so what's next? Well, we're finally ready to try and create our audio recording. So audio rec, and remember we created this earlier up here in our class. Audio rec is equal to, and again this is something else that can fail. We're going to try AV audio recorder, and we're going to make a new one of these with some settings. So it's this one, the URL, and the URL itself is the recorded file URL, and the settings URL that can actually fail. I apologize. So back to our array. It's actually an array of and we get a URL here. It's my bad. What we can do is we can put this into an if-let or something like that to be sure that this doesn't fail. You just go look at it in our utilities. Okay, so we've set this as optional, but we don't actually need to because we should get a URL from it. There's nothing forcing us to set an optional here, I believe. Could be wrong, but let's see. So I've saved that. There's no errors here in utilities. Let's go back to our record view controller. And let's change this record file URL up here to an exclamation. So we're going to tell it explicitly this does exist, and that means this error will go away. And the reason I've done that is because I'm pretty sure it's going to exist if we get to this point in the code. Well, I'm 100% sure because of the way I've actually coded it. Right, now we're going to get our audio recorder, and that's still optional, remember. We're going to set its delegate equal to self, the instance of this class. And that now means we can use these overridden functions here, or not overridden, but the life cycle hooks, sorry, WordPress coding there, the hooks that we can go into to find out when things have happened. Okay, delegate equals self. So once we've set all that up and we have no errors, now we can finally record. And we can save that. Right, so it's ready to record. What do we have to do? Well, we can actually set off recording in ViewDidLoad. So record audio. So it's going to start trying to record as soon as we open up that screen. We're going to change that a little later on, but for testing purposes, that's fine. Right, now we need to set up our recording ended. So if you recall, this gets called when that delegate function gets fired. What are we going to do? We're going to say audio record dot stop. Simple as that. iOS takes care of the file writing and the closing up of the file for us. But it is worth noting, don't try to access that file URL whilst you're recording because, well, obviously you'll get some kind of weird error like you would in any file system. Okay, now if we have a success, then we can transcribe with my horrendous spelling. Else, we can print out recording failed to end. Okay, so that's all we really need for there. We might need some kind of do catch statement here at some point when we come to transcription, but for now, we're okay. So let's run this in our simulator. And let's double check that we can use the microphone on our device, i.e. our simulator, to actually record. So I'm going to hit the plus icon here. And now we should actually be recording. Now we don't actually have a way to stop any of this. So if we go back, it'll probably stop it, but it's a very bad way to do it. All we were doing there was checking we have no errors and that the record audio function actually works because there's a lot of code in there. Right, so let's create a quick storyboard button inside this record view controller to actually stop that recording so we can test it a bit further. So here's our record view controller. Let's drop in a button. And I'm simply going to center this. I always click the wrong icon down here. It doesn't matter how many years you do this, you always click the wrong icon. So this button is going to be named Stop Recording for now. We can change that text color to the one we might expect to match up with our app, and we can just crank it up in size. Okay, so save that. Then let's outlet that button. So remember, control, click, and drag. Stop recording. Clicked as an action and connect. Okay, wonderful. We can close our assistant editor. We can head over to our record view controller and we can go to that function and we can now end our recording. So all we have to do is have our audio recorder dot stop. Okay, and that now means, well, actually, I've just noticed an error here. We don't need to call audio record dot stop here, technically. In fact, I think what we should do, we'll leave it as this. So this is going to stop it. And then when this stops, this function is going to fire without us doing anything. And then recording ended will fire, which gives us a chance to transcribe if we have a success. Okay, and I'm just going to print something here. Recording successful. So we know everything is okay. Okay, let's hit play. go over to our simulator, and hopefully, we should be good to go. So I'm going to click plus. It should be grabbing everything it needs. It should be recording me right now. I'm going to hit stop. And you'll notice down here, we have recording successful. Right, now we can actually check that was successful. So if we scroll up in our app to where we printed out this file location, what we can do is just go to the Documents folder, copy all of this up to there. We can Command-C, copy that. We can open our Finder. We can click Go when my wheel stops spinning. Go to Folder, paste in that address, click Go, and there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. There's our device. So here are our files in the documents for this app. And if you click each file, it tells you how large it is. As long as it's got a size, it's been recorded. And as long as I preview it, so just hit space when you're on it. Wow, you can't hear that, but I sure can. It's using my laptop's microphone, which is awful, like all laptop microphones are, including Mac. They're all terrible, terrible. But the good news, it does work, and it works on the simulator. Now, worth noting that you should test this on a real device, of course, because you can get different errors in the different devices. But anyway, that works. And whilst we're here, let's look at this file structure. So we have documents. We have this item, this folder with lots of numbers and letters, and that's our apps container. If we go back one more, we go to application, we go to data, right? Then we go to the actual containers, where are data, device, oh god, okay. Okay, in developer, core simulator, devices. That's where you find all of your simulators. Right? And then inside of devices, we can look for our simulator, which begins with 628. So 62B. I can't see it. Or is it 62B I should be looking? No, 628 it is. Anyway, you get the idea. I can't be bothered to look for everything right now. I'm just going to go back. Devices. Oh, there it is, 628. And then in your simulator device, you have data container. And then you have the containers for the data. I don't know why they put that twice, but whatever. Then you have your applications. Now, it's worth noting, these don't actually contain the app themselves. It's just a place where the app can write what it needs to write. So documents folder, and that's the one we pulled out in the previous lecture. So you know where it stores stuff, and we now know that it is successfully recording. Okay, we're just missing a little something here, and that is the ability to tell our user that recording is actually happening right now. Now, if you run this on a real device, if I recall correctly, there should be a little slide down from the top of the screen that says the microphone is being used. So your user will know. But it won't harm us to have something inside of the app that tells our user that recording is actually happening right now. So in the next section, I'm going to challenge you to create that display. It's time for you guys to do a little something. So I'm going to set you a very quick piece of homework. At the moment, when we click our button to stop recording, our app stops recording, but our user doesn't actually know. And our user doesn't know that we are recording, apart from the icons and services that iOS provides for that. But we want to be sure the user knows. So I'm going to set you two tasks. One is to make sure the user knows we are currently recording. Perhaps an activity indicator will do that in your storyboards. And two, I want the user to know that recording has stopped when they actually hit the stop button. Totally up to you how you do this, but all I can say is good luck. Pause the video here, and I'll be back in a few seconds to give you my answer. Well, how did you guys get on? Did you manage to do it? Remember, I set you two tasks. One was to tell the user we're currently recording, to let them know visually, and two was to let them know that we had stopped recording when we click the button. So let's look at how I would approach this problem. Right, so my main starting point is the activity indicator. So here I am in the storyboard. I'm just going to search for my activity indicator view. And what I'm going to do is just drop it somewhere near this recording section. And then we can increase the size of it. Yes, I got the first one. Got it right the first time that time. So perhaps 65 by 65. And we can position this relative to stop recording, center horizontally, and we can do some vertical spacing on it. Okay, so that's our little recording icon. Now, when we load up the screen, we start recording automatically. So what we're going to do is, with the activity indicator selected, we're going to select animating on it. And of course, we can change its color. I think it would look quite neat in our app's own color. Scale mode, perhaps we can have a fill. I'm not sure that's actually going to fill it, but we can try anyway. Right, let's outlet this indicator. Control, click and drag. And just call it activity indicator. And as usual, I've got that silly bug. Whoops. Control click, there we go. Activity indicator. That's worked. Now let's go back to our, where are we? Record ViewController. And on recording ended, we're going to get rid of that activity indicator. So you can actually do this in one line of code. You can type activity indicator dot stop animating. Now go back to your storyboard, and you have to ensure that your activity indicator has hides when stopped selected. So now it will disappear once it has finished. So that's how we do that little part. So that'll be our activity that we're recording. Then what we're going to do is change our button text to say recorded or something like that, because at the moment our button is simply stop recording. So do we have a reference to it in here? No, we don't, but we do have a reference to it here. And so what we can do is we can say if let button, just call it that, is equal to the sender as a UI button, then we can do something. Now, it's worth pointing something out here, that if I go over to my main storyboard, and let's say we have a button, we control click and drag to drop in our clicked function, we can click action. Now, what you can do is you can send over the type of it, so you can send an actual button. So I'll just call this test click. And you'll notice that over here, the sender is now automatically a type of UI button. And that means that in our other function, we don't actually have to change the sender, which is currently any, into a button. We don't have to cast it, is what it's called. It's totally up to you how you program these things. Right, so I'm going to get rid of that one we've just created. So we'll click our button in the storyboard. We'll go over to these little segues and things over here, and we will remove test click. Okay, and then once you've done that, you can actually remove test click from here. If you don't remove it from the storyboard, then it'll try to fire a bit of code that doesn't exist and you'll get a crash. Okay, so I'm going to switch that off, go back to our ViewController. Now the reason, as far as I can see, so it's, where was our stop recording click? The reason that it sends over a generic object of sender is so that you can actually tie these action functions to any kind of item inside of your application. And then you can test to see what the sender is, and you can do certain actions depending on the sender. That means you only have one function for a particular thing that you want to happen, and you can tie it to lots of different objects. Whereas if you sent a sender button, and then you try to tie this function of IB action to some other element, it wouldn't necessarily work because it would send over the wrong type. As far as I know, that's why it's set up like this. So I would advise you to just code in this manner. It's the one you see most often. Okay, so we've got our button. Now we can actually change our button dot title label dot text is equal to perhaps finished recording. And then what we can do is we can we can set it as disabled, so the user can't press the button. And we can also change the alpha of the button to dim it a bit, perhaps 2.4 or maybe 0.3. Okay, so let's play that on our sim. And now we should have a decent display of what's actually happening. So we, the user, are actually informed about it. Let's hit plus. We're recording. When we hit stop, the recording goes away and our button dims itself. But it hasn't actually changed the title. That's very strange. So let's stop that. It's changed everything else. That is very strange. Let's go to button dot. Have I put the wrong thing in here? Returns the title. Gets the current. Oh, we have to have this as a method of set title. That's my fault. So the title is whatever we're going to set it to. And for control state. Now the control state is simply what state the button is currently in. And I believe we just have normal. You can have default, normal, and you can have highlighted, selected, or disabled. But we're not going to worry about that for now. Let's record. Let's cut this over. We can remove all of this. Yeah, so unlike a label, which is what's on the button, you don't set the label.text, but you have a special set title for it that says finished. Perhaps we'll just have finished. Now we can run that. Let's hit plus, stop recording, finished. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of that. You can write in there transcribing if you wanted to. You could change it slightly after to have transcribing. Totally up to you how you want to do this, but that is the very basic idea of the homework. Now that we've got our file recorded and stored away in our documents file system, it would be a good idea to actually play it back to our users so they know that their audio has been recorded and they can play it. Because at the moment, they have no way of knowing apart from the text of our stop button. So let's have a look at how to do that. Right, let's start getting a bit more clever about this. So in most devices on mobile, you have limited space. So you can't be adding buttons all over the place. And that means it's a good idea to actually reuse your UI elements. Now at the moment, we have a stop recording button, and this switches to finished. But that makes it a dead button, which makes it utterly pointless. What's the point of showing something you can't use on the screen, and something you also cannot use unless you go back out of the screen and come back in? So what we're going to do is repurpose this stop recording button so that it changes to a playback recorded audio button. Now you might be wondering how we're going to do that. Well, let's go over to our record view controller. And inside of our button, we have our stop recording clicked. That's fine. Now, it would be nice to check if we are currently recording something. So let's see, and this is a good way to program, it's just experiment. Let's go to our audio recorder, dot. And what you can do is just scroll through everything in here. Oh, we have a Boolean that tells us if it is recording. So that means we can test if it's recording. So if audio is recording, then we can stop the recording and we can change our button over. If it's not recording, then we do actually have some weird issue going on because it should be recording. And it tells us it's not unwrapped. And that's because it's optional. So we have to say if let recording is equal to yada, yada, yada. Okay, and then inside of here, so this is just a slight repurposing. If recording is true, then we can stop. Else, we can do something new. Okay. So now we have a way of seeing if we're recording or not. And that means once we've stopped it, we can change the button. So let's grab this code down here where we get our button. Let's create another function. Change record button to play button. And let's bring that back a bit. So that's a very specific title. But it does what we need it to. Let's change that to caps. I like to be consistent with my camel casing. And this is going to pass in a button of UI button, which means we don't need if let here. So we're going to cut this if let. We're going to put it into this section after the audio recorder. And that section is where we're going to call the change record button to play button. And we're going to pass in this but, sorry, it's childish, over to it. Okay. And we can just change the name of that there so all of this code still works. Okay, so we've got a button.setTitle finished is enabled. Well, we want to keep this button enabled, so we can delete that. And we don't want to dim the button, so we can delete that. What we can do here is click play file. Or perhaps better than that is play recording. Or even better than that, sorry, I keep changing my mind, it's just play. Play. Right. So now, this button, once we finish recording, it's going to come in here, check if we're recording. If we are recording, it's going to stop it. It's going to send that button over to this function. It's going to change the title to it. Then the next time we press the button, it's going to come back into here. It's going to see that we are not recording. So it's going to go into this else block. So with complex logic like this, it's always a good idea to comment quite well. So not recording, time to play audio. And then likewise up here, recording, stop recording. Okay, so now we know at a glance what our program is actually doing. And we just have to change this to that. Okay, so now we can actually play our audio. So let's just have a play audio and let's create that somewhere. Play audio. Now, in order to play audio, we need an audio player. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They will see the boilerplate code they see on the internet and go, right, I know how to do it. And what they'll do is they'll create var some player here. And then below this, they'll initialize the player, etc., etc. They'll play. And we'll see how to do that in a second. But there's an error here. And that is this variable goes out of scope. So it goes out of this function. Once this function is finished, this variable gets trashed, deleted, which means your player is no longer available, which means you never actually hear anything play. So your audio players need to sit somewhere where they don't go out of scope for what you need them for. And that generally means we put them up in the class here. So var audio player, and this is of type AV audio player. So this provides playback of audio data from a file or memory. There are other kinds of AV players, just so you are aware of that. Let's make this optional. Okay, so in our play audio, we can now set that audio player. Now the first thing to do is to double check that the audio player isn't running. So let's stop it just in case. It shouldn't be, but it's just a nice little check to do. Then we'll create another audio player, which is equal to, and this is a throwable initialization of the AV audio player. So I'll show you what that means. AV audio player. An instance of the AV audio player provides playback of audio data. Well, I said it was throwable. It used to be, at least. It appears not to be now. So this requires, there you go. It will throw something. That's what I was looking for. Contents of a file URL. And guess what? We already have that in our recorded file URL. So this is going to be a try, right? And because it's a try, we need to have a do catch around it. So do catch let error and error. And then just whilst we're here, let's print out failed to play plus error dot localized description. Right, so we've got our audio player. Hopefully it's ready to start. And once we've done that, or we can do audio player dot play. And notice Xcode puts in that little question mark to check the optional for us. If we want to, we can give ourselves a message to say we're playing, but we don't need to because we should be able to hear it. Okay, so I'm just going to run that first of all. Okay, and what I'm going to do is turn up the volume on the laptop. Oh, we have a build failure. What's the issue? I think there's a lot of issues, and that means we have an extra brace somewhere. And when we save that, we should be fine. So I'll run that on the simulator. Normally, when you get a ton of issues, it's because there's a bracket or a brace out of place. Here's the other one. Okay, for normal, close brackets. Now we can hit play. So when you get tons of errors, don't panic. Just look for the syntax and the closing statements, the semicolons, whatever it is. Just look for all of those. Right, so I'm going to hit play. This is now recording, and I'm going to hit stop. And it's ready to play. Just unplug my earphones so you can hear this terrible sound quality from my microphone on the laptop and hit play. This is now recording, and I'm going to hit stop. Right, so did you hear how bad that quality was? But on the plus side, the play button works. And the logic to switch from a record to a play button also works. Okay, so we can play our audio, we're all good. But what if our app is running, we've recorded something, like now, and then we're playing something, let's say it's quite a long recording, a minute long. Then we go back out of transcriptions. What happens? Well, the audio player could still be alive if it doesn't get consumed by memory. So let me just turn this down. What we need to do is ensure the player stops when we exit. So what we're going to do is we're going to hook into the life cycle, perhaps down at the bottom, of the ViewController called View Will Disappear. And it's inside of here that we're going to call audio player dot stop. And we can actually also do the audio recorder dot stop. So we're just ensuring that we can actually exit cleanly from here. Right, so let's just run that. And we're going to test those two cases. So we're going to record something. We're going to exit once I sort my life out. Play. So we're going to record something. We're going to exit. And we're going to check that we don't get a crash and the audio player does actually stop. So I'm going to hit plus. We're recording. I'm just going to exit. And you'll notice it does actually write the recording for us, which is very, very useful, because that means if the user is stupid, and trust me, you'll get stupid users, they will still have the recording available if they press the wrong button or if their cat is playing on their iPhone. Right, now what happens if we're doing plus, we're recording, yada, yada, yada. We stop, we hit play, go transcriptions, and you didn't hear that, but it stopped the playback for us. So it's all these little quality things that really make the difference between your apps and all of the rest of the trash that managed to get through app review. So it's these little things that you've got that will actually take a lot of your time up. Right, so that's basically how you play back audio on iOS. We have our sign files, we have our playback sorted. Now all we have to do is send off our audio to Siri in order to transcribe it. So let's see how it's done. The first thing we need is somewhere to implement or to show our text from the transcription. So, as usual, let's go to our storyboard and find a place to put this text view into. Now, we can shuffle things around in here a little bit, and I think that might actually be a good idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this button to stop recording somewhere near the top of the screen. So I'm going to actually remove this vertical constraint. I'm going to remove the constraint vertically between the activity and the button. And I'm also going to remove this horizontal constraint for the activity. And then I'm just going to have this up here somewhere. I'm going to offset it a little bit to the left-hand side. So I believe we could do minus about 60 on this. And then I'm going to have this activity sat next to it, perhaps about there. Control-click. Let's center them vertically. And let's give them some horizontal spacing. And finally, let's center this stop recording to the main view. So vertical spacing. So it's up to you how you want to do this, actually. I don't think that looks too great right now, but it's something I'll leave to you to sort out what looks good and what doesn't. After all, this is your app. Something like that. Right, now we have space to drop in a text view. And we've used these before. So I'll pop that in there. Let's give this a few constraints. First of all, to the sides, let's give it a padding of about 20. And then at the top, let's also give it a padding of about 20. And then we can also give this a position. so horizontally, and we can control click and drag to the stop recording button and give it vertical spacing. Now it's complaining still because it doesn't have a fixed height. So let's give it a bit of height, perhaps put this up to 200. And now everything's blue. No more complaints from iOS. Right, so select the text view and let's change some properties over in the top right. First of all, we don't need all this boilerplate text. We can just delete it. We can just write transcription will show here once processing completes. And we don't want them, actually, I was going to click off editable, but we actually want to leave this as editable because the user might want to edit this. So I think it's a good idea to leave it as it is. Okay, I think that's pretty much all we need apart from outletting. So let's click our assistant editor, control click and drag over to there, and we will give this just a plain old text view. Okay, we can switch off the editor and we can go back to our record view controller. Now then, somewhere in here, it's getting a bit crowded. I admit, function, transcribe, audio. Okay, and we're going to worry about moving these functions around a bit later on in this module so we can make our app a bit neater and a bit more modular. But for learning purposes, we'll just write this transcription bit in here. Okay, the first thing we need is a speech recognizer. So let recognizer equal to an SF speech recognizer. If you recall, we've already imported speech up here. And we're going to initialize this. And then we need to make a request with our file in order to start the whole transcription process. So let request is equal to an SF speech URL recognition request. And this requires just a URL, and we've already got that. That's our recorded file URL. Okay, and now we can actually start recognition. So we grab our recognizer, and is this recognizer optional? Let's try that again. Yes, it is. So if we have one, we should do. The recognizer is going to start a recognition task with a request. We've just created that request. And then we're going to get a callback so we know that it's completed. Now, which one of these is it? We can give it a delegate. Let's try this second one, completion handler. So the request is simple enough. We have that. And the result handler, simply hit enter and then give this our result followed by the error. Okay. Now, we want to check that obviously we did get a result and that there is no error. So let's have guard let result equal to the result, else we'll do something, and once we've done something, we'll return. So what I'm saying is make sure there is a result, otherwise we have to take care of the error here. And if there isn't a result, it's pretty likely there's an error. And as usual, we print out. So let's just give that a bit of a description at the start. Transcription error. And we will do like so. Right, now assuming it comes back and we're okay, we're good to go, then we need to actually write it somewhere. Now, transcriptions come back in parts, right? So we need to go if the result, and have a question on there, dot. And you'll notice we have is final, right? So we want to wait really until we have the final transcription. We can get the transcription results as we go. So that will just, whoops, we need some other things here. Okay, that's asking us to unwrap it. Let's just change that. If let is equal to result.isFinal. Okay, so like I was saying, it comes back in dribs and drabs. So every time you get a result back, then it's a partial transcription. And that could be the whole text, but just not very well transcribed. It could be parts of it, I believe. And what we want to do is actually just hang on until we get the final proper result. Okay, so let's give ourselves a message, print got proper result. And then we're ready to actually display it to our user. For now, let's get rid of this silly error. Oh, it's just throwing a wobbly. Has that fixed it? No. It's not unwrapped. That's because, of course, error is optional. So for now, we'll just ignore that. Transcription error. And if we get it, we can always add the localized description. Okay, so we got our proper result. Right, so let's get the text from it. Let text equal to the result dot. And this is going to be the best transcription. So we want the best transcription out of this. And we want to have this out as a formatted string, obviously. Okay, once we've got that, we're actually going to write it into a text file stored on our device, but we're not going to do that in this lesson. We're just simply showing it to our user. So we can say self.textView, that's the one we just created in our storyboard, .text is equal to the text we just pulled out. Okay. Right, sorted. Now, to transcribe the audio, it doesn't really cost the user anything apart from uploading a file. And in this day and age, this is a small file. I don't think we need to wait for the user to press a button to transcribe something. We're just going to do it automatically. So what we're going to do is, on probably recording ended, if we're successful, we're going to transcribe it. So give ourselves a message and we'll begin the process. So let's save that and let's run it on our simulator. Okay, now the question is, will transcription work on a simulator? Well, let's see. So I'm going to record some rubbish first of all. La la la, I'm recording rubbish. We stop. And, oh, we have a transcription error. That's because my network is down, which is totally true. So just give me a sec and I'll go fix that right now. Okay, I've fixed that now. Let's go back to transcriptions, hit plus. Let's record something new and stop. And now we're transcribing plus next week or something. That's because of the terrible audio quality that comes through a laptop microphone. It just will not pick up the correct transcription. But you'll notice here we've got proper result. So if we stop that running, that's because in our transcription block, where are we? Here, we've got this firing quite a few times. So it has a few attempts at actually doing this. Now, I'd encourage you to actually mess around with this and to see what the transcription and the transcribe audio functions all do for you, and you adjust them according to what you need for your own purposes. Okay, now, final thing before I go. We probably need to set up some kind of error handling related to having no internet. Like you just saw, there was no way to know in the app that there was no internet. So I'm not going to do that now because I think you should have a very good idea of how to do that by now. So I'll totally leave that to do on your own. Right, that's enough for transcription. We'll move on to the next section. Now that we have a transcription already created from our recording, we've got a bit of text, and it would be great if we could actually save that transcription somewhere useful, such as on our documents folder, or in our documents folder rather. So let's look at how we do that. It's pretty simple. Now, just a quick recap. In our record ViewController, we go off to our utilities and we get a recorded file URL. So let's go look at that utilities class, and we can see we get our file URL, which is a combination of a file name based on the date and time and getting the documents directory. Okay, so now we have to get a file URL in order to save a text file. So as you'd imagine, the process is very similar. In fact, it's pretty much the same. So this is actually an architecture problem. So this is something that you should have, if you were making an app like this, that you would have planned before making the app so that you know what you're doing when you come to actually creating it here. Now, of course, I planned this beforehand, so I know what I'm going to do, but I just thought I'd make you aware of that. Now, it's totally up to you. If you want to give your audio file URL and your text file URL a different date and time, because remember, every time this gets called, it's unique based on the current second of the current time. So, I mean, generally speaking, all this is going to be the same. Minutes will probably be the same, but seconds will be different from second to second, obviously. Now, to make the organization of our app and our files much easier to deal with, it would be handy if our text file that we save to had the same format and the same base name as the recorded file. And we can do that because the two files have different extensions. Recorded is M4A, and the text file is going to be TXT. So they'd be exactly the same. And later on, when we need to extract them and show them to the user or whatever we're going to do, we know that we can just use the same file name and change the ending in order to grab it, if that's the way we want to go. Right, so in order to do that, we have to grab this date time just once. Because if we grab it twice, it'll be different. So in our utilities class, what I'm going to do is grab a var date time string, which is going to be the string. Now, obviously, we haven't set this. What we're going to do is call it inside of this function. So what we're going to do is we're going to test and see if it already exists. So if let datetime string is equal to datetime string, then we can simply return that datetime string. Right? So if we return it, we're obviously not going to do any of this, so we're sorted. But if it doesn't exist yet, then our function is going to fall through, our code will fall through to here and actually create the datetime string. Okay, and that means that in our audio file URL, when we call getDate and time, we don't have to actually refer to this because this function does everything for us. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the correct way to program for these things. Now, we're going to have a new function to get our text file URL. So we're going to copy this audio file URL, paste it in, and have get text file URL. And let's change the name. We don't have to, but it helps for us to understand when we're looking at this later. And this is going to be exactly the same, except the ending is going to be txt, and we're going to return the text URL. Now, if you wanted to be clever, you could actually combine these into one function if you wanted to that returned a generic path and added this to it using a different function. Totally up to you. But I think as it stands, we are okay. We're not at too much risk of repeating ourselves too much. Okay, so that was pretty easy. We now can get our text file URL. But we should go back to our record view controller, and we should correct for the fact that our utilities is slightly different now. So what do I mean by slightly different? Well, if we hit Command F and search for utilities in here, there is one instance of it, which is fine. But like I said, every time you create a new utilities object from the class, you're going to get a different date time. So what we need to do is just cut this utilities, and we should make a class level variable. So var utils is equal to a new utilities. And then we're going to use this because it gives us the consistent date and time across the entire class. So let's go back down here and fill in our utils. Brilliant. Now, what else do we need? Well, we actually need a text file URL. So back up to the top. Let's have var text file URL. Like so. And where are we going to do this? Well, what I think I'm actually going to do is this URL, I am going to cut it and I'm going to paste it into view.didLoad, which is up here. And why am I doing that? Well, technically, we need to do the URLs to actually run this view controller. So the best place to initialize them is in our main initializer, which for all intents and purposes is view.didLoad. So text file URL, and that way we can be sure that they are ready to use later on. So now we can have our get text file URL. Excellent. Right, so what is left to do? Well, we've got our text file URL. We just need to write our text. So that's going to happen after we've transcribed our audio. Now, what are we going to do? Well, I think it's better here to have a separate function to write text file. And this is going to take the text, which is obviously just a plain old string. And then what do we need to do here? Well, this is actually a thing that could fail. So when you're writing to the file system, obviously it can fail, I believe. So I'm just going to first write the basic code, text dot write to, and we want this option that allows us to have encoding, and you'll notice it says throws. And that throws means that we have to enclose this in a do, a try, and of course, a catch. And you can print out the catch error if you want. I haven't actually done that, so that's fine. So, write to, I've put try in the wrong place, stupid me. So where are we writing to? Well, self.textFileURL. Are we writing this atomically? True. Still don't know what that means. And what encoding are we using? Well, we're going to use a standard string.encoding. I believe it stands for Universal Text Format 8. And I think that means there are 8 bytes per character encoded. Okay, so that's sorted. We can now write our files. So let's run this on our simulator. Whoops. Before I run it on the sim, of course, we have to call it. So, write text file and give it the text. Now I'm going to run it on the simulator after I write self. Optional type. So this text is actually optional if we get the result. But we know we've got the result because we've fallen through here. So in this case, it's okay to force unwrap this. So let's hit play. Okay, let's hit plus. We're recording a terrible, terrible recording through my microphone on the laptop. I'm going to stop recording. Okay, we're going to tear. Oh, we're boarding in town till Sunday night. All right, if you say so. Right, so that should have now been written. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this location. So users, blah, documents. Let's copy that. Let's go to our Finder, go to folder. And here we have all of the previous items we've actually recorded. So I'm just going to remove those. We don't need them anymore. But down here, we have our file, which has exactly the same name as the text file. And if we open the text file, we are boarding in town till Sunday night. Seems to be what it's written. Then we go to our simulator, and that's what we have written there. Now, there is a slight flaw in this, in that this got proper result is actually called many times. So our system technically is doing more work than it needs to. It's writing that file multiple times. Now, it's up to you if you want to implement something that's going to fix that and only write to that file once. Totally up to you. But that is the basics of how we write text files. Now that we have transcriptions recorded and the text files associated with those transcriptions, what we now need is a record whereby we can save the reference to all of these files. And to do that, we're going to look at using core data, which is basically a database that sits on your disk, on your iOS device, your SSD, not a hard drive, obviously, like you can see in the picture. Now, of course, there are options for doing this. You can use user defaults preferences, but I wouldn't advise that, primarily because it's not designed for a growing data set. Whereas core data is more like a traditional database in that it is designed for an enormous data set. And of course, it comes with tons of tools that allow you to query it really fast and all the various things you expect from a database. If you've used SQLite before, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And again, you can use SQLite by all means in iOS, but I prefer to stick with the actual system tools that we're giving, such as core data, because we know they'll work more consistently than stuff like SQLite. Okay, so let's look at how we set up our core data. Now, if you recall, when we first created our new project, and I'm not going to create one here, but I'm just going to show you there was this option to use core data if you had selected a single view app. It wasn't actually available in stuff like a tabbed app. And that's why we went down the route of changing a single view into a tabbed app, because it was easier to do and have our core data included. Now, if you didn't include this, then what you're going to have to do is either create a new project and include it this time, copy all your files across, check everything works, or you can compare the two projects and add the core data code from your new one, which is an approach I wouldn't actually advise that you do. Okay, but you should have selected it because I told you to select it. Okay, so now it's time to initialize our core data. So let's create a new class that's going to do all of the core data heavy lifting for us. And we're going to call this a core data helper, because it'll be more or less the interface. You can call it interface 2 if you like. And this is going to help us access that core data. Now, the first thing we import, of course, you might guess, is core data. Okay, and then let's call this class core data helper. And now we can do some stuff in it. So the first thing we're going to do is when we initialize this class, first of all, we need to create a container for our core data. So let container equal to a persistent or an NS persistent container. And this requires a name for it. So we will call this transcription. Then this container needs some stores. And we're not setting any up right now. We're just letting the boilerplate code do it for us. So what we're going to have is a container dot load persistent stores. And all that's doing is initializing the whole thing. And actually, we want a different bit of code there. So let's try that again. Oh, that has changed. So we have a new thing here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so we've got this completion handler. Simply hit enter. And it tells you you get back a store description. You might get back an error. And then you can do something in your code block. So obviously, we want to check if our error is there, because if it is, that's not good for us. And we're going to print error in core data init. And then we can add, as usual, the error description. Okay, but if that's okay, we can print ourselves out a message and say core data init fine. Okay. So now we've got that core data helper. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our ViewController, which is our transcriptions view, table view controller. And inside of here in ViewDidLoad, we're actually going to initialize it. So, or actually not in ViewDidLoad, we can initialize it way up here. We can say var core data helper is equal to a new core data helper. And then I'm simply going to run that on our simulator just to ensure that everything builds and it runs okay and we have no errors. So core data it's fairly complex. So it's a good idea actually to check this framework early and often and understand exactly what it's doing. Okay, so what do we want? We want to check in our output do we have our output for our core data? Let's search for core. Right. So we have an error failed to load model named transcription. And that's perfectly fine because we haven't actually created the transcription model yet. Okay, so that's telling us that in our core data helper, this container that you've asked for isn't actually available. So it gives us an error. And that's good. That proves that our error checking is actually working. But of course, we need to fix the error. And I've just seen I've made a really stupid error. What we actually need to do is call this transcriber. And why? Because the core data that we're referring to, the container, is over here. And it's this name, transcriber.xcDataModelD, that we need to be aware of. So transcriber is there. Now, if I run that on my sim, we should no longer get that error. So there we go. Our core data initialization is fine. So that's my bad. I just did the slightly wrong thing there. And this is why it's actually good to error check all the time, because you actually get to the bottom of it before it becomes a deeply buried issue. So core data works. Right, so where do we add our models? Well, if we look over on the left-hand side, we can see a transcriber.xcDataModel. And inside of here, you can think of this as a kind of database with tables. Now, that's probably not exactly true, and it's up to you if you want to go find out how true or not that is and dig into the documentation a bit deeper. But for all intents and purposes, it serves our purpose. Now, what we're going to do is add what's called an entity, which you can think of as kind of like a table if you're familiar with SQL. So let's click Add Entity down at the bottom. And up here, you'll notice it's called Entity. And we can rename this just by clicking it once to Transcription. Now, this entity, this table if you like, needs some attributes. So we can add them in this little column up here. And the first attribute we can give this is a text file URL string. And you guessed it, an audio file URL string. And make sure you spell them better than I do. And both of these are going to be strings. Now, I like to actually name them with the type that they've got because it's a handy reference when you're actually typing these into code somewhere. That's all we really need to do right here. So how do we save these values into this so-called table? Well, let's go to our core data helper. Luckily, core data makes it very, very easy for us. So the first thing we actually need to do is get the context. So let's make a function to do that. And this is going to return an NS managed object context, which is an object representing a single object space or scratchpad that's used to fetch, create, and saved managed objects. So this is going to be sort of the central platform for editing, adding, removing stuff inside of our core data database. Now, the first thing we have to do is get our app delegate. And remember, the app delegate is the part of our app that communicates with the system and allows the system to communicate with our app and does all various functions around it, including core data. So first of all, if let app delegate is equal to our UI application, or rather just application, I believe these days. And we don't have it showing, and that's probably because we need to import maybe UI kit. There we go, UI application. Dot, and we're going to get the singleton app instance. Dot delegate. And this returns a UI application delegate. But what we actually need is to try and convert this to our own app delegate. And why is that? Well, the app delegate is where we actually can access this context that we need in our core data. So if we can get that app delegate, and we should be able to, then we are going to return. What are we going to return? The app delegate, appdel dot persistent container dot view context. And you can read all the descriptions on this. It tells you what all of these things are about. Okay, now because this could actually fail, it won't in reality. What we're going to do here is make this optional. And if we can't get that app delegate, then we are simply going to return nil so we can check for that later on. So we can actually get this context out. Now we're ready, once we have that context reference, to create a function called store transcription. And this is obviously going to take a couple of items, our audio file string and our text file URL string. Now, it's worth noting at this junction, you might want to create a class just called transcription or audio transcription, something like that. And then you can pass over one object from that class to store. At the moment, we only have two items, which is the audio file URL I'll just put it like this, which is a string, and the text URL, which is also a string. So I'm sure you know by now how to create classes and objects. So I'm not going to do that at this point, just to save a little bit of time. So let's or if we can get our context, if let context is equal to self.getContext, then we can go ahead and do something with that context. And let's give ourselves a message. Print saving transcription to core data. Okay, so what do we need? Well, first of all, we need to grab the entity. And if you remember, the entity is what we have created up here. So let entity equal to ns entity description dot entity, and it asks for an entity name, which is a string. And what is this entity name? Well, this is transcription. And it asks for a managed object context, which we've already grabbed out as CTX. So that's what we grabbed up here. So we have our context, we have the entity, the reference. This isn't the actual entity yet. It's just a reference to the table, if you like. So now we have to create the actual entity, the transcription itself. So let transcription equal to ns managed object context, or managed object rather, this one. So this is a generic class that implements all the behaviors required of a core data model object. So that tells you this is how you create the object you're about to save. And then what initializations do we have for this? Well, we want this one. So first of all, we need the entity itself. And that is the one we created up here. So that entity, now that's optional. That might actually fail. So it's up to you if you want to check it. In practice, I've never had it fail as long as you're coded correctly and you're inside core data. So I'm just going to force unwrap that for now. Then I'm going to insert that into that context we've created. Right, so we have our transcription, the basic object. Now we can actually transcript.set the value for our keys and strings. So we're going to set the value here as the audio URL. And then what's the key? Well, this key is going to be equal to what's in here, this attribute. Now, it's up to you if you want to make a structure to store these somewhere and make sure you have consistency across your app. But for now, again, for speed, you know how to do that. I'm just going to do it right here like this. And then I'm going to copy that, and we'll do the same for the text file URL. And then I'm just going to double check these spellings in our data model, text file URL string. Yes, audio file URL string. I'm learning from my mistakes here, guys. Right, so we've got our transcription, we've set our values. Now we have to save it. And when you save, you simply call context, or CTX rather, that's my fault, dot save. And you'll notice this throws an error because this could fail. So we have to try it, and because we're trying it, we should wrap this in a do and a catch. Let error equals this. So if we manage to get past this try, we should print out a message. Save to core data successfully. Is there one S or two S's? I think there are two S's in that. Otherwise, we can print out our usual error. error saving core data plus, and we can have error.localized description. The usual stuff. Okay, now we need to call this store transcription whenever we need to. And where should we do it? Well, I think we should do it in our record view controller, obviously. And we should, first of all, before we try to save anything, we should actually recall, or we should actually check some variables. So var recorded equal to false, and var transcribed equal to false. So as we go through the process of recording and transcribing, we can turn these to true, and if they are both true, then of course we can go ahead and save it in core data. We obviously don't want to save things that haven't actually worked yet. So instead of creating an extra button to save it, or actually repurposing the button we already have a reference to somewhere in here, that clicked button that we have when we play the transcription and get transcribed, what we can do is, let's think about this. Let's go to our storyboard so we've got something pictorial to look at. What we can do up here is we can try and be clever about this. So we click stop recording, it shows playback, it shows the transcription. And what we can do is we can actually change this item to perhaps save if we want to. But by all means, once we click back out of this, we are going to save our transcription. So that's an interesting proposition. So let's see what we've got here. What we can do to save this to a save is click this nav bar, and this back button, we can change the title of it. So we can call this save, and when you hit enter, notice how it changes here. Now that's going to change for everything that gets pinged off of this, just so you know. So that way we don't have to add an extra button. Coming back to our record view controller class, now we can look for view will disappear or unload. And we do actually have that way down at the bottom where we stop everything running. So in here, we can say if, and what was it? Recorded is true, and transcribed is true. Then we can actually save data. Save to core data. And then let's create the function to do that. So we need to pull up our core data helper instance. Dot store transcription. We pass it our audio file URL. Now, what did I call this? Let's go back up and see. Audio, recorded file and text file URL. So there we go. We simply store all of that. Now, the URLs themselves are URLs. And we're telling this to store strings. So before we change anything, we can go look at our data model and we can click the types and see what we can do in here. Now, there is no URL. It's a universal resource. I forget what I stands for, indicator or something. But I'm not sure that's going to be compatible. So what we need to do is convert these URLs to strings. So let's have dot, and we can set our absolute string for it. Now that should work. I know the old way of doing this was to actually remove this absolute string, and you could do it this way too, I believe, as a string. And actually, we'll do that just to see what happens. That's what coding's all about, seeing what happens. Okay, so if everything's working, there we have our error. Describing. Well, we don't want describing, so I'm going to undo that. There we go. So we have our absolute string stored, and that should give us a decent reference to the file. Okay, so now let's check it. Inside of the sim. And again, as usual, if this isn't working for you in the sim, try on a real device before you change anything. So core data init fine. Let's hit plus. Use my awful microphone. It's going off to get the transcription. Just got the transcription. And now I'm going to hit save at the top. And, oh, what did I forget? I forgot to set my flags. So it didn't save anything because we have recorded and transcribed as false. So let's go down to stop recording clicked. And what do we want? Let's see. Did finish. If our flag is true, recording ended. So if success, let's put recorded equals true. And then we're going to transcribe it. And inside of here, we're going to put transcribe equals true. Now I'm going to run that. I press Command R to run, or rather self.transcribed equals true. Command R. And now we should see our output where it tries to save it to core data. So plus, use my awful laptop microphone and stop recording. That's it. Okay, well, it's transcribed something. Now I'm going to hit save and look down here where you have our initialization is fine, saving transcription, and saved successfully. So in our core data helper, we've managed to go through this entire block and we've gotten to here, which means save has actually worked. So we should have something available in our core database. But we can't actually see that anywhere. Now you can install extensions to Xcode in order to visualize that data. There are tons of them. There's like top 10 articles even for which extensions people use to visualize their core data. I don't tend to do it because once you know the methodology here, you actually test it later on when you're pulling out the core data to show in a list view. So I tend not to need it. You may want to go and look those up and install them to see what's stored in your core data if that's how you want to proceed. But for now, that completes how to write to core data. Right, now that we have all of our data stored away in core data, it's time to learn how to retrieve it, and it's very, very easy to do, and then also show a table view based on the data that we have gotten back. So open up Xcode and let's do it. The first step of our process is to head over to our core data helper class, and inside of here, let's create a function to get all of our transcriptions. And this is going to return an array, which is optional, of NS managed objects. Now, if you were creating this app and you created a class to describe your data model, then you would probably want to return an array of that particular data model. But as we haven't done that this time, because we just want to do core data, then we have to return NS managed objects. Okay, first thing we need is what's called a fetch request. So let fetch request, and we have to specify the type of this fetch request, which is an NS fetch request. And with that, we give this a type called transcription. And this is going over to our transcriber XC data model, and it is grabbing the transcription out of it. Okay, and this is equal to transcription dot fetch request. So it's going off and getting that. Now you don't have to actually specify this, of course. I've just specified it so you can see, so you can end up with a bit of code like that. Right. Now, what we need to do is get our context so we can access our core data and then fetch the actual results. Now, this is actually failable. So we need a do try statement, but just before that, we have an error here, which is ambiguous use of fetch request. I'm not sure what that means, but if we just undo what we just did, perhaps that error will go away. Yep, I think that error is actually staying away. Good. Okay, so there was a reason I'd actually specified the type. It's because of some silly ambiguous error. Anyway, coming back to getting our results, we need to have these in a do catch statement. Because the thing we're going to try can, of course, fail. We might have no results. We might be unable to access the database. So let search results equal to, and we're going to try get our context. Now, context is actually optional. So perhaps we better say up here, if let ctx equals self.getContext. Then we can actually do what we need to do in here. So we can try ctx dot fetch, and this goes and fetches something using our fetch request. And you'll notice it returns an any array and also throws. So what's our request? Well, we've already created that. Fetch request. Okay, now we can send ourselves a message as developers. We have a slight error here. What have I done? Whoops. Let's just do catch here. We have a slight error because, and I have a feeling I know why here. Oops, errors thrown from here are not handled. Wow, what is going on here, people? Oh, that's because my brackets aren't in place, my braces rather. So I can undo that. And just before we do that, we can put those braces into place. See what I mean about the braces? Right. Coming back in here, we can get our search results and we can print got core data results. This is just for us to check. Plus, and then we can get our search results and we can simply return the count. We can say number of them or something like that. Okay, then what we're going to do, we probably have to turn that to a string. Or actually, you know what we can do is we can do it the clever way. We can do something like num. We can have backslash, backslash. And I don't know if you remember this, but I have done this with you before. You can open and close your brackets, and then you can put your item into there. And that should stringify it. Okay, so we've got our search results. Now we're going to loop through each, well, we can actually loop through each search result and we can print out what we've got, but I don't think we actually need to do that. All we need to do at this point is then return the search results. And these, let's see what type this is. Search results, it is transcription. So you can actually convert this as an NS managed object. So you have a generic object. It's totally up to you how you want to do this. Again, if you had a class where you would define your data model, then you wouldn't actually do this. You would just return the transcription class itself, or transcription type, rather. Okay, so we've got our errors down here. Let's sort that out. Okay, catch let. Otherwise, if this doesn't work and we don't fall through and we don't get this, then we have to come down here and we have to return nil. So we actually have nothing. Right, so once we've retrieved these, then we can go and get that stored data and update our TableViewController on our original screen. So that is this file, transcriptions TableViewController. And remember we had dummy items, but we can totally change this now. We can have var transcriptions is an array of NS managed objects, but we don't have that because we have to import core data here. Okay, and just for ease, we can create a new array of NS managed objects like so. So it's an empty array at the moment. Now in view.didLoad, we can go and get our transcriptions. So under check permissions, maybe. And then let's create the function. So what does this do? Well, this goes and gets those results from our core data helper. So if let results is equal to a new core data helper, which we've already created actually up here. So if let core data helper dot get transcriptions, and remember it's optional, which is why we have if let, then we can assign the current transcriptions to that result, or the other way around rather. Okay, now we just have to update all the other bits and pieces we need. Oh, no error, good. And by other bits and pieces, I mean this table view data source. So first of all, we need to change the count. We need to change this. And what do we need to change this to? Well, we need to change this perhaps to getting the value out of the transcription. So what I'm going to do is just cut this. And I'm just going to put the audio file URL. Or, no, rather, I'm going to put var transcription. Okay, then we can set the actual text of it. So, how do we get the text out of it? Well, we get our transcription dot value, and we can get this from a key. And which key is this? Well, if you remember, this is audio file URL string. Now, I know we haven't given this a name or anything, but that's fine. We are just checking what we get here. Now, this value, I believe, is optional. Yes, we have a question mark. So, if let URL string is equal to this, then we can insert our cell text label.text is equal to the URL string. Now, this is an any, so this could be anything. But we are pretty sure, because it's how we set it, that we can convert this to a string. Okay, so treating a forced downcast string as optional will never produce nil. There we go, we'll do that. It was never mutated, so let's have let transcription equals that. Okay, so that is our basic table view sorted. So we get our transcriptions, we get that. The transcriptions is equal to blah-de-blah. So if we come down to our table view, we have everything we need. Now this, in theory, should happen before the table view gets loaded with data. So let's find out if that actually happens. Let's hit play. Oh, I closed my my simulators. We have to wait for it to load. Right, and there we have it. So we have our basic transcription in here, which at the moment absolutely doesn't do anything, but we know that we're getting that core data out. Now what happens if I hit plus? We start recording another transcription and we stop. And that should go, oh, my network is down again. Excuse me whilst I fix that. Okay, all done. Let's hit plus. Let's record something and transcribe. It plus called something and transcribe. Ah, it was pretty close. That's pretty close. Okay, let's go back and save it. And we have an error because we don't actually get to see it inside of here. Of course, if we swipe away our app or we reload it from Xcode, then it's going to load up exactly what we need. We should have two results. Okay, so how do we get around that? Well, that's pretty simple. All we have to do is call get transcriptions. So I'm going to cut this in, not view did load, but view will appear. So every time the view appears, it's going to go get that data again. And that's all right if your data set isn't absolutely enormous, which core data and just plain text, you should be absolutely fine. I mean, it'll be about a few thousands of entries before you notice any kind of slowdown on today's devices. So if we hit plus, we're recording something else. We stop recording. It starts to transcribe. We're recording's house, of course, and we go back. We don't have it. And that's because you actually have to call one more thing because the view controller, or the table view rather, doesn't actually pick up there's a change. You'll notice down here in the debugger, we've picked up that there are 3 results, but it's not displayed in our table view. So what you have to do is we have get transcriptions here. So that's all sorted. That's all done. Once you get those transcriptions, you might want to call table view. Whoops. Just plain old table view dot reload data. Okay, so now we can run that, and it will reload the data every time it gets those transcriptions again. Now, depending on your data set, if it's light data, it's fine to reload it. If it's heavy data, I'll just do this whilst I'm talking. If it's heavy data, then you might want to insert a cell rather than get all of your data again, because that's a very expensive process to do. Sorry, I'm distracted by the transcription here. It's a very expensive process to do. It's telling me I'm wrong. You're so wrong. Anyway, showing a whole bunch of cells again and again that have, say, images in them is an expensive process, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so let's go back to save, and now we have 4. And of course, we can repeat this as many times as we like. And as long as the transcription has saved. I'm sorry, guys. It's blame Siri, not me. Oh, boy. Okay, there we go. We got 5 results now. And nothing happens, obviously, if we click it. What a thing to save to core data. Anyway, that's how we save to core data, put the data into our table view, and how we update the table view once we are done with refreshing it. Okay, guys, I've got some challenges for you up ahead. These are pretty epic challenges, and I'm not going to give you the answer for these because I want you to go and figure them out yourselves. So they are going to be difficult, but please don't give me a 1-star rating because they are. I'm doing it to improve your analytical skill and your ability to search out answers because it's a crucial skill as a developer. Even more so than being a programming god, it's searching for stuff. Right, so your first part of the homework. is to give the transcription a name, because at the moment we just show a file URL in our table view, and that's a bit lame. So you want to give the user an ability to enter a name, perhaps in a text view on the recording screen, and then to save that when they hit the save button. Now, a couple of clues. All you have to do is give the name into core data. So you know how to do that. You've got a template for adding variables to it, of strings. And then maybe if the user doesn't fill out the name in the recording screen, you can give the user some kind of alert to let them know that they haven't done it yet. Okay, so pause the video here, go ahead and have a good go at that. As I say, I'm not going to give you any answers for this because you really have to think this stuff through yourself. Right, if you're back, then you've completed the first homework. The next homework that I want you to do right now after this is I want you to implement slide to delete for unwanted transcriptions. Now, this is a bit tricky because you've got files, you've got core data, and you've got a table view. So primarily, you want to implement slide to delete, and you can find that on the web. It's very easy to find. And what you need to do is you need to delete the data from, first of all, the core database. Secondly, you need to remove the recorded file and the text file from your document system. And you should know how to get a reference to those by now because you have the data in core data. And thirdly, you need to update the table view or simply reload the data. Right, so go try that now. Pause the video right here, and I'll see you for the next homework. I hope you managed well on that second homework. Here's the third one. We have a favorite screen that hasn't yet been implemented. So I want you to do that. I want you to give the user a way of favoriting one of their items. How you do it is totally up to you. And again, you'll want to use core data for this. Add a Boolean, for example, that says is favorite, yes or no. So pause here, go and have a go at that. Hello again, it's time for homework number 4. I think this is the final one. You need to allow the user to review and edit transcriptions. So when they press something on the table view, it's going to take them to an edit screen, which shows them the transcription and allows them to change the text of that transcription if they want to, and then save that again. And again, this is all stuff that I've shown you. You just need to bring together opening a new ViewController from the table view, populating it with the transcription, and allowing the user to edit it, and then saving the changes. So pretty difficult, but not difficult if you take it step by step and think logically. And again, no answers, so pause right here and have a really good go at it. Really well done, guys. You've reached the end of this module. I hope you didn't struggle too much with the homework, but it was very difficult homework, I'll admit that. Here's a little summary of everything you've done. You've created a nice simple transcriber app. And some of the stuff you've learned along the way is you've learned how to create tabbed apps starting from a single view app. You've learned stuff about permissions for the microphone, recording and saving of files. You've learned where the document directories are, and you've learned where to store those items, as well as getting transcriptions from Siri, turning our voice into text. You've also learned how to do very basic audio playback and some of the permissions issues around that because your device can only take in one microphone input at a time, so you need to request permission from the system. We've also looked at the very basics of core data. Now, you could write volumes of books on core data. It's very complex and very useful, but that's not what this course serves. This course serves to get you going with actually putting apps on the App Store. And of course, we looked at how to save the text files. And I'm sorry, I gave you a whole ton of homework to go along with all of this. Right, so all that's left to say is wonderful job, well done, and as usual, here are some fireworks.